IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast, live with you all on a Monday, which means it's a little bit of Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. We're going to talk a lot of topics today. One that we were always going to talk about, and that is talking a little bit about the Notre Dame 2024 defensive class and the need for a strong finish. That was kind of always going to be a little bit part of this today's show. But we were woken up, and it was news that we were expecting sometime this week, but we didn't know it would exactly be this morning. Bodie Kahoun, star linebacker out of Patrick Henry High School in Roanoke, Virginia, committed to the University of Notre Dame. So we're going to do our typical commitment recap. We're going to talk about the fit, how we got to this point, talk about the class impact. We're going to talk about also what's next for the Notre Dame class. And also got a nice little segment waiting for you all that's going to split up those two segments. Got a little next edition of Karson's Corner, which I got to sit down with Karson Hobbs, cornerback out of Archbishop Moeller in the 2024 class. If you didn't watch Recruiting Hour last week, it was our first edition of Karson's Corner. I thought it went really well. Everybody seemed to really dig the first edition. So
Karson's got a lot of personality, man. Like he is a really, and this episode was way better than the first one, even though the first one was good, because you can tell Karson was a lot more comfortable just like with the format of it. Like you could just tell, like, okay, this is what we're doing. Let's roll. So yeah, he did really well.
It's definitely a different vibe when you're more of a interviewee, and now you're more of a co-host almost of sorts, right? Like that's kind of the vibe that he's getting a little bit. So we talked a little bit of superlatives in the 2024 recruiting class, as well as give you a little insight into some of the Notre Dame coaching staff and some of the personalities that they have over there. So we're going to get into all that. Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll, but of course, yes, Brian.
Before we begin, I got to say this. Okay. Quinn Kibler has a little bit of an announcement. He said, not only did Notre Dame get a commitment from Antonio Carter on Saturday, but I too got a special commit from my now fiance. So Quinn, we are very happy for you, man. Congratulations. She said, yes, that's great news. Another member of the IB fam, buddy. Just wanted to congratulate you. Quinn's been with us for a while. He's been on the show for a while. Man, I still remember getting engaged to Angela, Ryan, and it was over 15 years ago. You know what I mean? 16 years ago. And it's a pretty cool deal. So definitely congratulations to you, Quinn. Absolutely, man. That's a great way for us to start the show. You know what I mean? Like
it's the beginning of the end, man.
The IB family is growing on the recruiting trail. It's growing, with our subscribers, and Quinn, we're super happy for you, man. So I just wanted to get that out there before we dive into this breakdown of Notre Dame's latest commitment, Ryan.
Yeah, and again, talking the commitment of Bodie Kahoun, and Quinn, congratulations, by the way. I'm completely joking to say it's the beginning of the end. It is the beginning of the beginning, sir, all right? So, Bodie Kahoun, linebacker out of the state of Virginia in the 2024 class, committed to the University of Notre Dame this morning. He became the 16th commit for Notre Dame in the 2024 class, as well as the second linebacker now. Last Friday, of course, they received in commitment from Teddy Rizak out of the state of Nebraska in the 2024 class as well. So we were talking just last week at this time, when is Notre Dame going to get their first linebacker commit? When is it going to come? When is it going to come? And we are sitting here just a week later, and now Notre Dame has had two commitments in the linebacker class for 2024 in 3 days. Now we're rolling a little bit. So, Brian, this is a very interesting one. Fans of the podcast and people that follow Notre Dame recruiting in general,
Yeah. This is one, been there, Ryan. This is one of those ones, Ryan, where it's not a surprise that it happened. We kind of expected Notre Dame to get Bodie Kahoun for a while. And really going back to when he made a second announcement that he was going to be visiting for the April 22nd game, the Blue Gold game, a month after he'd already come on up, you're kind of like, okay, you're kind of seeing the writing on the wall. And then coming out of that visit, Ryan, you put on the board, and I think you said in the show that there was even conversation then that Bodie was already thinking of moving up his timeline. There was only one reason to move up his timeline, and that's because he wanted to just get it over with and he was going to come to Notre Dame. But they had decided initially that, okay, let's wait till the June visits. And then they just decided, after continuing to talk as a family, like, look, and you got the impression talking to him, Ryan, that it was like, do we really want to waste people's time and effort if we know where I want to go? And I think the decision of Teddy Rizak, to me, I would not be shocked if it had some influence on him. Like, hey, they've been very clear early on that they are only taking 3 linebackers. This is where I want to be. Let's jump on board. And I think that might have sped things up a little bit for him. But I think Bodie Kahoun to Notre Dame was always sort of a thing. It was always sort of something we thought were going to happen. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of angst about linebacker recruiting, and we'll get into all that in the second part of the show. But the fact of the matter is, this is a good football player, and guy that it looked for a while like it was going to be him and Cole Sullivan. I'll say this: whatever you think of all these players, to me, I would have much rather had Bodie Kahoun than Cole Sullivan in the class, and that's how it's going to shape up. So, very intriguing player, Ryan, and we'll dive into the film and what we think and all that. But here's the thing: from the moment Notre Dame offered Bodie Kahoun, he was a priority. Yeah. So this is no, when you say what you want about rankings and all that, we'll get into all that stuff later. I promise. There's a conversation to be had about that. But the fact of the matter is, from early on, Al Golden, Chad Bowden, Marcus Freeman, all of them, very early on, Bodie Kahoun was the guy that this staff prioritized. Yep. I mean, I would argue that there's not 2 linebackers they've recruited harder in the calendar 2023 year than Bodie Kahoun and Kingston Viliama-Asa, as far as effort the staff has put into recruiting them. So, I mean, that tells you a little something about how the staff views him at this point in time. Again, we can have the debate of whether that's right or wrong or whatever, but they definitely view this kid as a must get in this class.
They did, because, I mean, I put out a piece earlier that was a little bit of an insight, and it was an interview I had done this morning with Bodie after he put out the news. And I think what mirrors your sentiment, Brian, is that when I asked him about his relationships with the coaching staff in Notre Dame, he didn't talk about Al Golden. He didn't talk about Marcus Freeman. He talked about Al Golden, Marcus Freeman, Max Bulla, Chad Bowden, all of them, the whole gambit, right? So he's not talking to just 1 or 2, like a primary and a secondary recruiter at Notre Dame. He's talking to 4+ guys at Notre Dame, not even including, obviously, Coach Bayless when he's coming on campus to be able to, look at the body and all that great stuff. So clear priority. Again, to your point, we can talk about how everything got to this point and whether there was a flawed process, and we'll get into all that, folks. We will. But as of now, there was no question that Bodie Kahoun was a guy that Notre Dame wanted. I mean, someone posted on the board, I think it was this morning or yesterday, Brian. It was like, they asked something about, does this mean that Notre Dame isn't confident with things with Kingston Viliama-Asa? I'm like, no, This is just because they really like
nothing to do with it. Right.
That's all it is.
Nothing to do with Kingston. Right.
Yeah,
that's the thing. And when let's talk about the class impact, Ryan. So we kind of did a little bit on the backstory here. Let's talk about the class impact of Bodie Kahoun to Notre Dame. Obviously, here's where you were. And the last couple of years, Notre Dame has done extremely well. It's going to sound a lot like what we talked about in the Teddy Rizak one. But the reality is that you did incredibly well last year recruiting linebacker. You did incredibly well the year before, and so much so that you've been able to already move some of those linebackers to fill needs in other areas where you haven't done as well.
Right.
When you look at the numbers, Notre Dame is a 3 linebacker-based defense, but they're just not going to play as much base defense moving forward as they have in the past. And so I still think that to me, 8 to 9 linebackers is the most that you're going to get to, where in the past you'd get to 9 to 11, because if you're a 3-down base linebacker team, 8 to 9 is the absolute max of where you're going to be. And the fact of the matter is, Notre Dame has 5 linebackers on campus that head into the 2023 season with 4 years of eligibility remaining. And so you're in a situation where 2 to 3 is the need for linebacker in this class. The staff wanted 3. They wanted 1 outside guy and 2 inside guys. So what you now have is Teddy Rizak gives you the outside guy. He gives you the rover body. They can talk to him all they want about him moving inside. He's a rover, okay? And then Bodie is a pure inside guy. Now, Bodie played safety as a sophomore, but not in the way that like a Drew Tranquil or a Teddy Rizak played safety. He just happens to be the best athlete on his team, but he's not a guy that you look and say, I wonder if that guy could play safety. He's definitely a linebacker, and he hit a jump. I mean, he hit a growth spurt this past year as well, which we'll dive into. But he's a guy that the staff views as an inside guy. Now, that's the interesting part. They view him as, they've talked to him primarily, Ryan. The conversation has been primarily, hey, you're an inside guy. You can play both, but Will being the number one talking point with him.
Yeah.
And I like him a little bit more. Mike, a lot of this is going to be determined by his senior season, however, because I think two things have happened with Bodie in the last year. Number one is he's decided football is now going to be his future. Right now, he's talked about maybe playing both in college. We'll see how that plays out. But football is his priority. And so you're now seeing him start to emphasize football more, where on film it's very clear he's just an athlete playing football. I'm curious to see what kind of jump he makes as a senior and how that could transition to him being potentially a Will. Because when you watch a sophomore film, you see a kid playing free safety that shows a lot more range than he did as a junior, in my opinion. And so, because that was the question I had for you, Ryan, is I was like, hey, can you get a speed thing on him?
Yeah.
Because just the way that they use him, the way he plays, it's kind of hard to tell just how much speed he has. Then you watch the sophomore film, you're like, this kid can run a little bit. And then he told you, Ryan, that he got timed electronically at a 4.54 this summer at Virginia Tech's camp. So kind of like what we saw with Teddy Rizak, kind of like what we've seen with some other players, is they're going into that period where some of these kids are seeing jumps in physical maturity.
Yep.
And I'm very interested to see kind of what Bodie's looks like, because when you see photos of him from his visits, when you see my wife took some photos of him from the game when she was doing photography, he's already started to fill out. He looks a legit 215, 220.
Yep.
He was not 220 on his junior film. And so I'm very curious to see how that fits. But the one thing for sure is he's an inside linebacker in this defense that potentially could maybe outgrow the position and to be a Viper, but I view him right now as an off-ball inside linebacker in this defense. And he now gives them two linebackers, but this is the first inside backer that they've got in this class.
Yeah, I mean, from a fit perspective, we see him positionally exactly the same. And I know that obviously you dug into how Notre Dame season, which is the most important thing at the end of the day. Very interesting, Brian, because like you said, I mean, the kid's growing, right? I mean, I hate, somebody on the message board said, like, why are we recruiting Drew White all over again? I'm just like, guys, like, come on, man, stop. I mean, Teddy's legit 60 plus, 219 pounds.
That was such an absurd comment. Drew White was barely 6 feet tall and 210 pounds coming out.
Yeah.
But then those same people will complain about offer lists. Drew White had offer lists from like LSU, Florida, Florida State, Miami, like Clemson. That kid had a very impressive offer list. So, and was a starter on a playoff team. It's kind of weird, some of the comments. So basically any white linebacker now basically is going to be the next Joe Schmidt or Drew. There's no similarities physically between Drew White and Bodie Kahoun. None, other than the pigmentation of their skin. That's it.
That's
so it's been a very lazy pushback by some, and we'll get into some more of that type of stuff in the third part of the show today.
Yeah.
But yes, this is a long rangy kid that fits well, Ryan, with what this staff looks for. Whether you like the players or not, he definitely fits what they're looking for. And that's the thing is, if you want to think the staff is reaching or not, it usually shows when the commitment is outside of the norm of what they look for.
Right.
Teddy Rizak and Bodie Kahoun, say what you want about them. They are within the norm of what this staff likes. They like long, rangy, versatile, often two-sport athletes. And that's what Bodie Kahoun – it's absolutely what Bodie Kahoun is at this point in time.
I mean, Bodie Kahoun he's an all-American lacrosse player. Like, he's not just a good lacrosse player. He was committed to Ohio State to play lacrosse. So, obviously, he is a legitimate player on both in both arenas from the sports perspective. And he, to your point, Brian, again, this kid is a 6'2 plus. Weighed in 219 pounds this offseason at Notre Dame. So he's up right around 220 pounds now. Ran 4.54 at Virginia Tech, like you said. He also ran 4.57 at a different camp electronically timed. So he's been pretty consistent in the 4.5s. Also had a 35-inch vert at one of the testing spots as well. So, I mean, he's got some variables and some measurements to work with, obviously. And I think that there is excitement, I think, over him, because we'll get into obviously the film. There is a lot to improve upon from a technical perspective, but then you hear that he's only been playing linebacker 1 year. He is a two-sport guy, so the focus on just one is going to be big and massive, I think, for his improvement in the arena of football. So I think that there's a lot of upside with a guy like a Bodie Kahoun. I don't think we've seen. I think that there's going to be a incorrect assumption here that Bodie Kahoun is a high floor, no ceiling prospect. And I couldn't push back more on that sentiment because I believe that he has substantial upside that we haven't hit yet. I really do.
The problem that we're having here, Ryan, in this discussion, and we'll just say it now real quick and we will talk about it more, but we need to say it now because this chat is getting out of control and it's really starting to annoy me, to be completely honest with you. Just because you think a guy is a project doesn't mean the Notre Dame staff does. Right?
Yep.
And just because you think the staff should wait on a guy, and look, it is fair to criticize the staff for taking a guy who's on film you don't like. That's totally fair. I've been doing this my whole career, right? And it's totally fair. My issue is don't project how you view onto the staff's motivations. Why are they reaching for this kid? They're not, in their minds, they're not reaching.
Yeah.
And you say, well, this is what Kelly did. And no, it's not. Because Notre Dame would settle on kids after they were very clearly not going to get top targets. What you have to understand about this commitment, and again, there's a conversation to be had about whether or not their evaluation is correct. If you want to question their evaluation, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But to act as if this is some sort of settling or some sort of project, that's not how the Notre Dame coaching staff views Bodie Kahoun. And I said this earlier. There are two players that he got offered in what, January? When did he get offered by Notre Dame?
Something like that.
January,
February, something like that.
From the moment that they offered him a scholarship, and this came during their sort of evaluation period, postseason evaluation period, when they were kind of getting out on the road, they were seeing more kids, they were watching more film, they were expanding the board. The moment that they offered him, that he became a priority for them, more so than other players. You guys like Cole Sullivan, Ryan, and you and I have some inside information on this that we can't really share with y'all, but I will say this. I'm comfortable saying this. From what I know of the board and what Ryan and I have seen of the board, Bodie Kahoun was always in a category above where the staff viewed Cole Sullivan.
Right.
Cole Sullivan was viewed a lot like now they liked Cole Sullivan and they would have taken a commitment, I think, at some point in time from Cole Sullivan. They never pushed for Cole Sullivan. There's a difference. They've been pushing for Bodie Kahoun. They viewed Cole Sullivan as a bit of a projectable kid. They loved his upside a whole lot more than I did, and that's one that I very much disagreed with the staff on. But Bodie Kahoun is not a kid that this coaching staff views as that kind of project. He has been a top-level guy for months. Yep. Now, we'll have a conversation later about should they have viewed him that way. And that's a very fair conversation. But this is not settling in any way, shape, form, or fashion in their minds. And so if you want to have an honest conversation about Bodie's commitment, first of all, take a deep breath, but have the conversation about what it is, not what you think it is, because that's useless. This is not a settling commitment. And somebody had asked, why didn't they wait till the June OVs? That should tell you exactly where he was. There was no need to wait for the June officials when this was a kid that you viewed as a priority recruit. Now, I know we like Cole.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, say we like Chris Cole more. I personally do anyway.
Yeah.
And some in the board do. But that doesn't mean that the Notre Dame coaching staff does. Right? And so that's the thing we have to understand is so what I'm not telling you all have to love this commitment. I'm not. I'll never do that. Because that would be one of the most hypocritical things I personally could ever do, because I'm not one of those. If the staff does it, it means they're right people. But at least have a conversation about the actual reality of this recruitment. And so then question the evaluation, sure, but to act as if this is some sort of settling for something or a reaction to them missing or something like that is just not accurate. And I want to make sure that we're clear on that, because the conversation's getting really out of hand in the chat. And there's a lot of people talking about things that really aren't reality to this situation. And when you're doing that, it makes it hard to have a real conversation about this kid. So
sure.
That's kind of where this one is, Ryan. But it does give them a player that at least one, for the people that are stargazers, at least one recruiting service graded him as a 4-star. I grade him out as a 4-star. Now he is at the bottom level of the 4-star because there's a lot of things technical and mechanics and things like that we'll get into. But this is a kid that's got some ability. And I think, Ryan, you like him a little bit more than I do even, correct?
Sure.
We were kind of having that conversation a little bit earlier.
Yep.
So there are certainly some things to like about Bodie, and we'll dive into that here when we get into some of his highlight film.
Yeah, I think timeline wise, it reminded me a little bit, not exactly, but a little bit like the Jaden Greathouse recruitment last year, Brian, because you remember Jaden, Notre Dame was in a great spot with Jaden after his final visit to Notre Dame, and you were just kind of like, this is going to end here. And then I remember I talked to Jaden, and then Jaden was like, I'm going to take my officials, maybe go into the fall with it and then figure it out then. It's similar that because Bodie had talked about like, hey, we're reevaluating things a little bit. And then he comes back to like, hey, I'm going to take my officials in June. And then we'll decide shortly after that. But then obviously it's one of those things where, I mean, he said word for word that he just knew, like he didn't need any more data points. Right. It was like he knew where he wanted to go, and it was Notre Dame. And it was just a situation that we're here, and Notre Dame has their 16th commitment in the 2024 class. And I look forward to having a deeper conversation as far as where the defense needs to go. And we'll do that obviously later in the show.
Oh, yeah.
But I like Bodie Kahoun, man. I mean, I look, we'll get into this a little bit later, but Bodie Kahoun would have been a take for me personally. That's just my opinion, just me. We'll have that conversation, but I like Bodie Kahoun. There's a couple guys that ended up in Notre Dame's class so far that I maybe wouldn't have pushed for as early as Notre Dame did. I mean, that's been fully transparent on this channel, but Bodie Kahoun's not one of those guys. And again, I might be wrong. Some of you all might be right, or it might be vice versa. I don't know. But either way, I see a lot of things in Bodie Kahoun's game that gets me pumped up. And that's just my personal opinion.
So obviously Notre Dame, Ryan, we said, has a second linebacker in the class. They're getting close to meeting their needs. We'll talk about what's next after we dive into the film. But I do want to dive into his film, Ryan, and there's a couple different highlights available of him. Not a ton of football highlights. So how I came to my conclusion of Bodie is obviously watching his junior film as much as I can. Also watching his lacrosse film, honestly. And that's kind of the thing where there are some people that have questioned his athleticism. And I'll be honest with you, Ryan, what was my first question when we first talked about Bodie Kahoun? What was the first question that I had about him? Is he really a top athlete? That was kind of my thing. You when you watch the film, you'll see it in flashes, but you don't see it necessarily consistently. Well, what was the one thing that started to change my mind? It was watching him play lacrosse. Yeah. Because when you see him play lacrosse, you see a sport he's far more comfortable in fundamentally. And that leads to him playing faster, playing looser. You see a lot more suddenness, a lot more explosiveness, a lot more speed, change of direction, all of that stuff on the lacrosse field. You start to see it. Then the football stuff starts to make a lot more sense when you watch the film, Ryan, because you say, okay, because what's the thing we always say? If a guy lacks something, or if a guy shows something occasionally but not often, you have to ask yourself, is he just not capable of that? Is that just kind of who he is? Or is there a mechanical, a technical problem that causes him to maybe not play as fast? Or is it a mental thing? He's not comfortable necessarily with what he's playing. When you watch this film, he went from playing a free safety that can see everything to playing a middle linebacker where everything happens much quicker. So I think there was an adjustment period there. And I think the other part is just a guy who fundamentally plays too high and doesn't always play with the sort of decisiveness that you'd want from a linebacker. And I think that was something that I noticed on film. But you do see those flashes, and we'll bring some of that stuff up now, Ryan, because I do want to dive a little bit into Bodie's film here. And the first thing you'll see, to me, he does have size now. And there's definitely some size to work with, and he's got a really nice frame. He's going to be a 235, 240-pound linebacker in a hurry, in my opinion, which is why I kind of project him to be a guy that is going to play some Mike. And this is one of those flashes, right? This is kind of that downhill speed that you see that you want to see from a middle linebacker, an inside linebacker.
Yeah, no, I think the pursuit to the perimeter is something that really popped off the screen to me and almost immediately when watching Bodie, because I think that we do see one thing very similar, Brian, is that he does play a little bit too high. I also think that kind of affects his power profile at times, because I think that he takes on like he's a good tackler, but I think that he takes on things a little bit too high, and that kind of messes with his lower body power at times. But I mean, this play right here, I think, is a perfect illustration of this, right? A quarterback scrambling out of the pocket and that pursuit speed right there. Because I would argue that that's not the greatest angle of pursuit to start there.
Which is a problem for him for a lot of plays, Ryan, is the angles.
But the gets flat here and is able to run him down and just kind of shows that pursuit speed. I think that that's why Notre Dame has talked to him about playing will linebacker, because they see some plus in pursuits, the ability to have range on the back end of runs, which I think is something that's going to be very interesting on the next level.
So you talk about the power profile, and I think this is an example of kind of when you see it where he does stay low here and you see him really smack this guy pretty good. But there are a lot of times where, and we'll bring up, there's some other film here that I want to bring up as well. Here's another example of him closing on a guy. There's some other film where you'll see him get through the hole and you're like, okay, really good instincts there, really good read there, but he's just playing too high. And he's not able to deliver with the same power. But I always say, if a guy can do something 3 or 4 times, he can do it more often than not. It means he's capable of it. He just has to learn to whatever it causes him to do that. This is an example here, right here, Ryan. This isn't a really powerful hit. It's because look how tall he is on this. This is something he's got to get his base down, bend more at the knees, keep a wider base as he's working through the trash, and then explode his hips through contact. You know where I see him do that? On the
he's running to the perimeter. Yeah.
on the lacrosse field or whatever. So, I don't know what it's called. If it's called a field or what. I have no clue. Like I've said soccer field. No, it's not a soccer field. Well, what's it called? It's called a pitch. Okay, whatever. Soccer field. Whatever the lacrosse field is, you'll see him do that more. You'll see him explode his hips through contact more. This is a really nice clip here. You see the little bit of that power profile we talked about, Ryan.
Yep.
So you'll see snaps of it. You'll see clips of it. And that's what the staff sees. They see, hey, this guy's got the tools that we want. He's short area quickness is really impressive when he keeps his base. And this is a great example too, because when he plays like this, Ryan, he's blitzing. He shows me so much more explosiveness and change of direction than he does as a linebacker. And it really comes down to here he's in a sprinter stance, and as a linebacker, he hasn't quite figured out the footwork is not what he needs to be able to play with the same type of athleticism, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, you could look at that play right there, Brian. Like, I think that's really good instincts and be able to see the game. But out of his trigger, which is the first step that a linebacker takes out of his stance, you can see that he pops straight up, right? Like his butt gets high. So that's going to affect just his ability to transition downhill and to be able to
make him look tight. What that means is it's going to make him look tighter than he actually is.
Exactly.
And that's where you kind of get into it. And that's where you have to see those things and say, okay, why does he do that? Like when you're talking about an offensive lineman, okay, he's a waist bender. Okay, why? Is he just not flexible in the knees, or does he have bad technique? And that's one of the decisions you have to make. Now, and I do think that Bodie needs to obviously get stronger in the upper body, clearly, but that's something else too. Is like I said, he's going to get a lot bigger, a lot more physical. This right here is impressive to me because he doesn't really have a lot of coil here, but he still stones the guy. And to me that was a pretty impressive clip.
Yeah, I mean, I literally did a film breakdown earlier, Brian, which I know will be live on the site. But I think the biggest thing that you talk about with Bodie that I need to see improvement on, and we hit on it already, is I think the power profile is something that needs to continue to get better. I don't think he's the strongest kid in the world right now. I think that you are looking at a kid that is 6'2", 219 pounds with good length, who can run. I think that's what you're seeing right now. But I think that there's good instinctual awareness there. I think he sees the game pretty clearly. It's just about getting to your spot and being able to play off contact consistently, because that is a big thing with linebacker. To your point, is that you're playing in such a smaller window, ability to take on blocks, get downhill, transition laterally, that things happen so quickly, man. So that's why you always need to be in that proper power position, be able to use your hands, coil quickly. Like, there's a lot of really reactionary proactiveness to play in the linebacker position, because you're a reactive player. You're reacting to what the offense is doing. But the best linebackers almost see the game before it's even happening, man. That was one thing. It's like, why did you take a step that way, Luke Kuechly? Because I knew the play was coming. Like, I just knew it, right? And that's kind of that innate ability to be able to play in those tight windows.
Yeah, it is, because one of the things too, Ryan, when you talk about instinctiveness, there are times when he shows that, but there's also times to me where he doesn't look like he's trusting himself, which is going to come when you talk about a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience. And I'm going to pull up some sophomore film here too while we're talking, Ryan,
Yeah.
and share some of his sophomore clips, because you'll see he does things a lot differently as a sophomore. He's more of a free safety. You'll see him here kind of playing like a whole safety type of situation. And this is where, and I texted you after I was watching this, like you see some speed there, right? Because you see some speed on the close. You see him undercut this route effectively. I mean, he's just toying with this kid at first on the route. And then he reads it, and then you see him kind of turn up the juice a little bit. And you're like, okay, that's that speed you're talking about. And as I said before, do you know where else I see that speed? I see that speed on the lacrosse field. And so a sport that to me, looks more comfortable playing right now. That doesn't mean it's his best sport, but it's a sport he looks more comfortable. That's a nice hit right here. But again, look how loose he is here, Ryan. He's still a little tall, but he's bending his knees a lot more. He's light on his feet because he's coming downhill from the safety position. He's not – when he plays linebacker, he tends to plant his feet like almost like he's balanced between front to back, which is, you want to have that on the balls of your feet, that sort of athletic stance type of thing. And when he plays linebacker, he kind of flat foots or even gets on his heels a little bit. And I think that just puts him in a bad position just to begin with from a footwork standpoint. But you see nice, easy change of direction here. Nice read, picks the pass off, sees that backside seam, jumps it, and picks it off. See, a much more disruptive kid as a sophomore too, Ryan.
And I'm glad that you mentioned some about the sophomore highlight, Brian, because honestly, I was doing my film eval of the junior film, and I'm like, I don't really know how to evaluate him as a pass coverage player right now, because he just wasn't, you didn't see that much on the highlight film from a junior year, but then you see him as a safety in as a sophomore, and you're like, okay, there's clips of him actually navigating space in pass coverage that is just kind of different from what you had in 2022. So I'm very interested to see the jump that he takes as a senior, because he is going to be significantly bigger. He's going to be a little bit more explosive than he was as a junior. I think that there was a big jump that obviously he can take going into his senior season.
Mm-hmm. And he's going to need to. I mean, the tools are there, but he's going to need to. This is another thing you saw him as a safety playing a lot lower when he goes in for contact, because he's coming from distance. I don't know what's going on with us today, man. Like, you're coughing. I keep hiccuping.
Well, mine's allergies, man. My allergies have been terrible the last 3 days. It's been awful.
That's no good.
Yeah.
Here's the one, Ryan, where you see a little bit of him turning the jets on a little bit, getting downfield, show some speed. Again, this is sophomore film. You see him, open it up in coverage. You see him changing direction. This is kind of what you're talking about. You see some things here that you're like, okay, I didn't get a chance to see that on film as a linebacker. They just let him play downhill the whole time. He is not a safety. I know it's always, someone asks every time you see a linebacker play, say, is he a safety? No, definitely not. Definitely not. So that's decent speed there, chasing that kid down from behind.
Yep.
Again, I would say he's still a raw football player that has the tools that you look for. He just has to figure out how to put it all together. And that's what the staff is banking on, because they're banking on they see the athleticism and the frame, and they're saying that's what we care about. Because what have I always said? Look, one thing I always want to be is consistent. Ryan, what have I always said about technique of high school players? I've always said this. I don't care. I don't. That's what I mean, when I was this way when I was a coach. Like, well, that's what I'm paid to do.
Right.
It's my job to teach him how to play. It's his job and God's job to give the kid the physical tools for me to then, refine it. Because I've said this before. I coached 5 years my first stint, and I think I coached like a couple All-Americans. I coached an all-conference kid every year. And I've always said, like, I didn't walk into the room. I mean, every team I coached an all-conference kid. I didn't walk into the room with these average athletes who were not very good football players, and because of my wonderful coaching ability, I turned them into all-conference and all-American. No, I had kids that had the God-given ability. They just needed it harnessed, and it was my job to harness it. And that's what this Notre Dame coaching staff has been banking on with this group is they see the athleticism. They think they can harness it. And what have we seen the staff care about? Speed and length.
Athleticism, yeah.
Now, we'll find out if this kid can play football at a high level or not. And right now, I don't think he does play football at a high level, right? I'm just going to be honest. I don't think he's a guy. You watch him and then you watch Kingston, and you're like, okay, that's two different type of kids as far as where they are in their development as football players.
I agree.
Two very different kids. But what you see with him is length and athleticism. And that's what the staff cares about. They don't care about that other stuff. And I'm be honest with you, I'm okay with it. And you see that too, as you see his weight jump. He gained about 30 pounds in a year.
Yes.
It's going to take you a little while to get kind of caught up to speed when you're there's going to be some adjustments for you at that point in time. And that's what the staff is banking on. So that's when they evaluate this kid, that's what they're evaluating. That's what they're saying. You can disagree with it if you want, but that's where they're at with that.
And I personally, in today's game, I love linebackers that have a safety background that have played it, because you're going to be asked so much more than what you once were to specialize in some area of pass coverage, whether that is as a zone dropper, a landmark guy, or that is as a man-to-man cover player that can work in the slot at times, whether that is just kind of dropping down into short zones and be able to rob some underneath zones. Like, there's going to be a lot of different areas that a linebacker is now asked to make an impact in the passing game. I mean, we even see guys now, they're specialized blitzers, from the second level, and that's kind of their role in the passing game. I think of, and I'm not comparing Bodie Kahoun I'm not comparing him to Pete Werner, but the one thing I loved about Pete Werner when he was coming out of high school was that he was out of Cathedral. He was legitimately playing safety and mid-hole safety as a junior and senior of high school before he transitioned, obviously, to full time to second level. And I think that helps you so much, man, being able to understand how to navigate space. Because I played linebacker, and I'll be honest, like, I didn't understand the nuances of pass coverage until I started coaching. I didn't understand what was happening behind me, what's happening on the back end, why I'm dropping to a certain zone 100% of the time. I didn't understand those things. But when you're a safety and you get to see everything from the back working its way forward, I feel like you really departmentalize and understand why are things all happening around me. So I think that safety background is big time for a linebacker today's game, especially a guy, if he does end up as a Mike linebacker, that is going to have some duties of, let's get guys lined up. Let's get the defense called. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page. I think those things all matter tremendously, on top of just the simple ability of understanding where to drop and how to drop and play man and stay low in your pedal and be able to mirror. All those things really matter, I think, at linebacker in today's game. So I like that background. I think that he has a lot of traits to work with. So I'm a fan of the pickup.
Yeah, like I said, you like him a little bit more than I do, but I think there are certainly some things to look at and evaluate, Ryan. Again, I'm going to kind of get back to similar to what I said with Teddy Rizak, is let me see how they finish the class. And when I said that, you anticipate Bodie Kahoun being a guy that we thought was going to be part of the class. The question now is, when you look at what's next, it's okay, what are you pairing it with? Because the interesting thing that I think people need to keep in mind, and there's going to be a lot more to say about this later, this is not a very good linebacker class nationally, in my opinion. It's really not. And a lot of the top guys that they were on, that they liked very early, before there was even an evaluation of Bodie Kahoun. Because again, coming into the season, when they're offering, some of the guys are offering, this kid is a 6'2", 190-pound free safety, as you saw on film. And then it wasn't until after the season that you see he's now 6'3", 215, 220-pound, linebacker. So he's a different body type than he was before. But those guys, there just wasn't a ton of interest from those guys. Like early on, a guy that is somewhat highly ranked, that some people like, is the Chris Jones kid from Virginia.
Yes.
And, look, he just wasn't all that interested in Notre Dame. But I'm going to be honest with you. You can't watch Chris Jones' film and watch Bodie Kahoun's film and tell me that this kid is better than what Bodie Kahoun is. But he's ranked higher, so there's a perception that he's a better player.
Yeah.
I think he's a more advanced player, but he's not a better athlete. You could say he's a better player. That I will agree with you on. But what you can't tell me is he's a better athlete, that he's a better prospect is what I was trying to get to. Not that he's not a better player, but he's a better prospect. I don't think that he is, because the ceiling isn't as high. And as I've said all along, I care more about the ceiling than I do where a kid is right now.
Yes.
That's where you have to be, and when you're evaluating. But now it's okay. What's next? What goes with it? And I think that's going to be the key. And when you talk about what's next, a linebacker, it really starts with one guy. I mean, it's been the top guy on their board all along, and ultimately will determine if this linebacker class is a success, Ryan. To me, it really comes down to, can you close with Kingston Viliama-Asa or not? I think that's what this linebacker class will ultimately be judged by, is can you get him? Because what you've done is you've landed two high ceiling guys that both need a lot of work. Now, Teddy Rizak is actually a very fundamentally sound, instinctive, excellent high school football player, in my opinion. But the question is, can he fill out and those type of things, right? This kid Bodie is the opposite. He's not a real advanced technical player and all those type of things, but the athleticism and the ceiling is high. To me, what I like about Kingston is that he is without question the highest floor on the board right now. And it really comes down to what we say a lot, Ryan, which you have to balance the ceilings and the floors when you're putting a class together. You can't be all high floor. You can't all be high ceilings. Ideally, you want to be high floors and high ceilings, but then that's just not where they are right now. But Kingston is a guy that has the highest floor on the board. And you get him, I'm feeling really good about this linebacker class. Miss him, and even get a guy like Chris Cole, who we both like a lot. There's some question marks there because you've now taken three guys that are all projectable, not projects. A project is different than someone who's projectable. There's a huge difference. But these kids are kind of projectable. They're going to need work. They're guys that you're banking on the upside, but they're lower floor guys. And as we've always said, it's kind of like the defensive line class last year, Ryan. We love the ceilings of that group, but it's a risky class because why? They're all low floor guys for the most part. At some point in time, you have to start also getting the high floors as well. They got it in last 2 years' classes, in my opinion, but in this class, they haven't gotten that yet. And that's what makes Kingston so important to this class. Get Kingston, and my feeling about this linebacker class is pretty good. Yeah. Ryan, miss on him, and I start asking some very, very, very tough questions that somewhat still exist anyway, about linebacker recruiting, but it would make it even more very, 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 very much more concerning for me at that point in time.
Well, I think some guys on each board are just kind of the easiest bets, right? And I think that's what Kingston is in this class at linebacker for Notre Dame. He's the easiest projection to being a really good football player early on in his career. Like, he's the easiest one. He is 6'2", 6'3", 225, 230 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. He's been playing for St. John Bosco for now. I know he missed his sophomore year after an injury, but he's been a starter on his team for 2 years, would have been for 3. He is a guy that everyone has known about. He was receiving offer. I mean, he got offered by Ohio State when he was a freshman in high school. Like, he's been offered for a long time, been on the radars. He's a really aggressive football player, really instinctual kid, explosive in short areas. There's a lot to like about Kingston Viliama-Asa, and he is one of those kids that, again, this matters, in my opinion. He has been the foregone leader and playmaker for the top team in high school football last year. National champion, St. John Bosco. Over 100 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, and he took an interception, 50 yards for a touchdown. Mm-hmm. I mean, he is an absolute game changer for one of the premier high schools in college football. And that matters. You want to talk about high floor, right, Brian? A guy that can come in and compete immediately. It's usually these kids that play at the highest level, that produce at the highest level. And when they come, talk about Jaden Greathouses of the world, the Rico Flores of the world, they get dropped in the spring bowl, and it's like, they're not out of place here because they've been playing high-level football for years. And that's what I see with Kingston. So I agree. He is an absolute – he's already kind of been in this category, but he is 100% in this category now. He's a must-get in this class. You cannot miss on Kingston Viliama-Asa because he is the high-floor player in a class that is built, at linebacker at least, around – development. Guys that year 2, year 3, year 4, that's when their shine is going to happen, not year 1. Kingston needs to be that guy in this class. I love Chris Cole, but if you're only going to take one linebacker in this class, Kingston Viliama-Asa is the must get. There's no question.
Chris Cole's obviously on the board. Brian Huff's on the board. Those are sort of the lower floor, higher ceiling guys. that we've kind of talked about. Keyshawn Flowers is a guy they've been out to see a couple times. They've been out to see Jalen Harvey a couple times from DC. Not a lot of traction there from what we've been able to see so far, Ryan. It really does come down to getting Kingston. And if you don't get him, there's this impression out there. I get some people feel like Notre Dame is going to get Chris Cole if they wanted him. I don't know where that came from. It was not a given that Notre Dame. It's not a given that Notre Dame could get Chris Cole. First of all, they do want him. They do like him. Now they may not take both of those guys. We don't think they'll take both of those guys. They like Chris Cole a ton. But there's this impression that, well, you shouldn't have taken this kid and you should instead take Chris Cole, then see if you can get Kingston. Well, it's not a given you're going to get that kid.
Yeah.
Even if the staff did feel that way, which they don't, by the way. I mean, there's a reason that this kid got offered first and has been a top target earlier from a somewhat similar area. It's not like the other kid was unknown to them. So I think there's this opinion, there's this impression that, well, the staff is selling. Roanoke High School and Salem High School are 15 minutes apart.
Yeah.
The staff has known about Chris Cole as long as they've known about Bodie Kahoun. I can promise you that.
He camped at Notre Dame last year, Chris Cole. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a reason the staff focused on this kid earlier, because they like him a lot. We'll find out if they're right or not. That's the and this is the whole point I'm trying to. That's the question. The question is, okay, is he the caliber player Notre Dame should be getting? That's a very fair question. The thing that I don't like, as I'll say again, is the notion that, well, they're settling, or that they should have take other guys. Sure, we can have that conversation, but don't say that they're settling for this kid when they could have had Chris Cole, because they don't view it that way.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference. When Notre Dame would take certain guys, I won't start mentioning names because it'll seem disrespectful, but a lot of the guys they took a linebacker, they took because they missed on other guys. That's not necessarily the case here. They stopped recruiting other guys when they got involved with Bodie Kahoun. They stopped pushing for Chris Jones after his visit because they liked Bodie better. They didn't see the same frame, the same length, and the same athletic upside that they saw with Bodie Kahoun. I don't think they'd have got Chris Jones anyway. That's just my personal opinion. But He had an early interest. He visited twice, I think.
He did?
At least once.
He visited twice, yeah.
So clearly there was some interest there, but they like this kid better. We'll find out if they're right or not. That's the question. The question is, are they right or not? The question isn't, this is a panic move, or are they settling? They're not settling in their mind. We'll find out if that evaluation was correct. But that's true for all these kids, right? And so that's kind of where it comes down to, and where I think the conversation needs to be.
And we won't know if they were right or wrong for a couple years. The development that needs to happen. We're talking about a 17-year-old kid, right? Like, the best of what Bodie Kahoun may be at Notre Dame is not going to be Bodie Kahoun at 18 years old. It's going to be Bodie Kahoun at 20, 21. Right. So we'll revisit this as always. There's no question.
So I do need to say this, Ryan, because I do find this kind of funny to kind of discuss here. But do you know what Bodie Kahoun's or what Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah's ranking was coming out of high school? By chance,
he was mostly a 3-star, right?
Mostly a 3-star kid, right?
Yeah.
He was evaluated. I think 247 had him as a 3-star kid. They had him as the number 10 player in the state of Virginia.
Okay.
Bodie Kahoun is the number 11 player in the state of Virginia. Very similar ranking profile. Jeremiah his ranking got boosted a little bit by the fact that ESPN ranked him pretty high. They ranked him as a 4-star, just like Bodie's ranked as a 4-star. So 2 sites view him as a 3-star, 1 as a 4-star, just like Jeremiah. 2 viewed him as a 3-star, 1 as a 4-star. The point being, not that he's going to be the next Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, but most people didn't think Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was going to be the next Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah when he signed either.
Yeah.
Mike Elko banked on traits. He banked on skill. He banked on length, athleticism, versatility, and that's what this staff is banking on Bodie. We'll find out if they're correct or not. That's a very fair assessment. But this whole why did we sign another 3-star linebacker stuff is just tiresome. It's very tiresome, and I could give you a million examples of why that's tiresome if we're going to be honest about it. So We'll find out here, Ryan. Find out soon enough, right? Find out soon enough. Let's get down to some more here, Ryan. Let's get down here. I want to see a couple things here real quick. Okay, so that's it for the what's next aspect of it, Ryan. Let's move on to the next section of today's show.
Yep. So we are going to move over in a second to Karson's Corner, which is a great segment that we have going on here at Irish Breakdown. That co-host, I guess, of the show now is Karson Hobbs, star quarterback out of Archbishop Moeller in the 2024 recruiting class. He's been so nice and so generous with his time over the last couple of weeks. So we're going to get to him in a second here. Talked a little bit of superlatives in the 2024 class and talked a little bit of the Notre Dame coaching staff. Trying to give you guys a little bit of glimpse, I guess, behind the curtain a little bit to some of these players and these coaches that you see or are going to see every Saturday. But before we get there, you can just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, notification bell at the bottom of the screen. We'll be back here all week at 1 o'clock Eastern time, as well as IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 o'clock. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know all that great stuff. Boards at irishbreakdown.com for all your latest recruiting and team intel as well. But without further ado, that's going to end this portion of the podcast. Without further ado, Karson's Corner. Episode 2, bringing you guys a little glimpse into the 2024 recruiting class for Notre Dame. Welcome, everyone, to the second edition of Karson's Corner, brought to you by Irish Breakdown and Irish Breakdown Podcast. Make sure to go visit the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com for latest intel on recruiting, team information, all that great stuff. Also hit that like button, subscribe, notification bell, 5-star reviews if you enjoy the latest from Karson's Corner. If you missed the first episode, which was last week during the recruiting hour, want to really give you guys a full scope into the 2024 class as best as possible. The best way to do that, I think, is to bring on Mr. Karson Hobbs, star cornerback out of Archbishop Moeller, committed to the University of Notre Dame, former South Carolina commit, who is now a part of the Irish family for the 2024 class. Karson, welcome to you back, man. You're not a newbie as a host anymore, brother. How's everything been going?
Everything's been going great. Actually, just touching on last week, I think we started off talking about track times, and we broke a couple records this week, so everything's been going pretty smooth so far.
I love it, man. I love it. And me and Karson were talking about this a little beforehand, because for people that watch this podcast religiously, you know that I'm a little bit of a track nerd. Been doing track, playing football, coaching track, coaching football my entire life. So I really am kind of a nerd for some of these records. So Karson, 4x1 was what was the record that you broke. So give the people a little bit of highlights as far as the times and everything, man. It was a huge accomplishment, obviously.
So we ran 41.4. which put us number 1 in Ohio, number 1 in the city, number 1 in the region, all that. And then in a 4x2, we ran 125.9, which not only put us the number 1 time in Ohio, but a top 3 time all time in Ohio history. So not only was it just, a winning race for this year's time, but I mean, overall, we broke meet records and we made history.
That's incredible, man. And I know that you have a very talented 4-man crew that runs that. Yeah. I think you have Jordan Marshall, who's committed to Michigan on there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I need to ask you this, man, before I get back to the track time, because it's incredible time.
Right.
How does that work? We got a Michigan guy with a Notre Dame guy. You guys butting heads a little bit there, man?
Yeah, we butt heads. We talk about it every day. But at the end of the day, he knows if we play in the playoffs, what we're going to do to them. And as long as he can keep that mentality until he gets to college, he's saving himself a lot of harm and a lot of stress, because the whooping we going to put on them. I can't wait. But no, it's in all seriousness, it's all love. I mean, I consider one of my best friends. That's one of my brothers. I do wish that he would have got the chance to come play for the Irish with me. And I know that was it would have been one of his options. But look, nothing is completely said and done until signing day is the way I like to put it with him. So he might be in Michigan now, but I'm going to still recruit the mess out of him till that signing day in December.
Well, man, it's funny. I was actually watching highlights on him the other day, because I didn't know that. I didn't really know much about him until you mentioned him on the podcast last week. So I went back and popped in his tape. He's a good player, man. He's a really good player.
Oh, yeah. He's a dog. He's a dog.
Oh, man. We might have to get him on the podcast, man. I would love a little bit of Notre Dame, Michigan rivalry back and forth, That would be pretty cool. Yeah.
That would be good.
Well, but I mean, seriously, man, I know I speak for everyone at Irish Breakdown and just the whole Notre Dame community when I say congratulations on the track time, man. That's absolutely wonderful. I know you guys just had a really good 4x2 number as well this past week, correct?
Yes, sir. That was the 125.
125. That's awesome, man. That's really great times. For people that don't understand that, it's like do you know what your split was on the 4x1 by any chance?
Opened up, so I split 20.9.
20.9 on the 2, and then what was your split on the 4x1?
10-4-1.
10-4. Oh, yeah, that was good too, man. Because you said you were 10-5 last time, right? So 10-4-1.
Faster.
Oh man, that's fantastic. So make sure to stay tuned. Karson Hobbs just doesn't do it on the football field. He's also a great track athlete, obviously. And
yes, sir.
Karson, I'm really excited about this one because I'm going to be honest. I'm going to put it out in the universe. I came out with a little bit of some superlatives for this class, and I think that people are really going to dig this because I just went through basically a bunch of different categories, and how we're going to kind of do this is I'm going to leave it up to Karson to designate these superlatives to a member of the Notre Dame 2024 recruiting class. And I'm going to say this as well. He can pick himself for any one of these superlatives. So even have a couple extra ones at the end, but we'll get to that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit of Notre Dame staff, but we'll keep that to the end. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. First superlative, member of the 2024 Notre Dame class that you would say is the biggest class clown.
Cam Williams.
Oh, is that easy? Is that easy?
Cam, easily.
Oh, I love it, man. He's the so let me ask you, because I've had the chance to talk to Cam in the past. I know he's got an energetic personality. Is it any different in text messages than it is when you see him in person, or is he the same dude?
He's the same dude. I would say in person he's more a responsible goofy, but over text he is crazy. So he's definitely the most goofy.
Love it. I love it. So let's go to the next one. Most likely to be president of the United States someday.
I say the class leader, CJ Carr. I mean, quarterback, QE1, president. I mean, it kind of correlates.
Oh, it's so funny. It's so funny. Let me ask you, man, because that's actually a great point. I feel like every time a player is a quarterback, he kind of has that easy designation, right? Because you're the de facto leader, whether you want to be or not. Just give me a little glimpse into CJ from what you've been able to just kind of get from him, man. Like, is he as good a leader as people act? Just what kind of person is he, just in your opinion?
For sure. And not only, taking the quarterback lead role, I mean, he also takes a lead role, like you were saying last week, in the recruiting standpoint. So I just feel like him always knowing the guys we need to get and the guys we want to get. I mean, he'll let us know before, sometimes anybody, like, hey, like, make sure y'all go give him a text. Like, he's a dog. We got to get him. And I just see the efforts and the stuff you put in. Like, he wants this team to be great. And that's what, as being the quarterback one and all that, we need. We need a guy that wants to see greatness. So he fills out all the check marks when it comes to that.
That's why I love this class so much, man. It seems like a lot of you guys are just kind of on the same wavelength as far as the leadership responsibilities. I mean, you have 14 guys in the class now. I mean, I've been consistent. You, Cam, CJ, I know you mentioned Aeneas is another great recruiter. It just seems like you guys have a lot of great recruiters on the class right now.
Yeah.
Next superlative, best bromance in the group.
CJ.
Or with yourself?
CJ or Cam. Bromance? Okay. Probably them. Them too.
Yeah. Well, I guess that one makes sense, right? Because the quarterback wide receiver thing.
It really is. I mean, it makes sense, and I'm telling you, that's how it is. 100%.
Next, what I have for you is most likely, and this one's a little bit of a silly one. I'd be fully transparent on that. Most likely to drop their phone in the toilets.
Me. 100% me. I ain't doing, man. I'm clumsy, and I hate it, but I'm clumsy.
Oh man! All right, just don't take a phone near any toilets then. I think it'll be okay.
No, I will.
Are you one of those? I have to ask this because I used to get made fun of all the time because when I was younger, before we really got super fancy with the Otter boxes and everything with iPhones, I used to be the absolute worst with cracking screens. Are you like one of those guys as well? Because I used to be. I wish I could show you
my phone right now. The screen protector is destroyed.
Is it?
Yeah, it's destroyed. Yeah, that's not too good.
Oh man, my mom used to get mad at me so much, man, because I just used to drop that thing all day, every day. But yeah. All right, let's go to the next one, Karson. Next one this one's a creative one. I feel like you can go a lot of ways with this one. Most likely to survive the Hunger Games.
That's a hard one. Most
Yeah.
likely out of everybody to survive the Hunger Games.
So I guess we're talking about resiliency, right? They have to have a little bit of that, I guess outdoorsiness to them. They can survive, different situations and all that, protect themselves. Like there's a lot of things I guess you can go with on that one.
Yeah. Like I said, Missouri's a wild place with some wild people. And I've never been to Missouri and I've never seen Missouri. But it just sounds crazy to me. So I'm going to go with Aeneas. Because I don't know what they got going on there, but it just sounds crazy. It's Missouri, like I don't know.
All right. So Mr. Aeneas Williams, I guess he's the survivor of the group. We'll go there, man. Let's go to best dancer of the group. Now, I'll say this before you answer this one. When I played, we didn't really care about dancing that much. So like this one would have been a big one. But you guys, you love to dance now, man. So is there a best dancer of the group?
I'm going to go with Jack Larson only because I know he plays 7-on-7. So I know anybody that plays 7-on-7 football, you're going to be dancing and celebrating, doing all that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls some stuff out of his bag.
I love it. Well, let me go to the next one, which I feel like Class Clown might coincide with this one, but I'm interested to see if there's a different answer. Most talkative.
In real life or over text?
Either way. You can take it either way. You can do both if you want as well.
I'm going to have to go with either me or Cam.
It's got to be a wide receiver at a corner, man. You guys do the most talking.
I think that's who it is.
Oh, it's 100%. Funny. Karson, I've had some really good relationship with corners. I remember I actually still have a really good relationship with J.C. Horn that went to South Carolina that plays for the Panthers now. Yeah, man, I love J.C. He's my dude. But I used to bust on him all the time every time I talked to him because I used to tell him that I always could find him on film because he never had his mouthpiece in, man.
Ever.
I'm like, he just wanted to talk the whole time, you know?
But it's fun, though. It's competition. You got to love it.
Are you a talker on the field? You like talking a little bit?
I am. And I think it's more of a competitive talk. I think I got too much respect for the game to talk down on certain people. You know what I mean? It's just you out here, we out here balling together. Like I always gonna have a little bit of respect, but at the end of the day, I want to beat you at what you do. So I'm gonna talk.
Hey man, I love the attitude. I really do. I played linebacker. That was my spot, and I was about as big a talker as anybody on the field. I feel like on defense, you have to be. You gotta
have that swag to you, or you gonna get beat. That's how I feel.
Yeah, because defense is such a reactionary side of the football, right? It's like I am literally reacting based upon everything an offensive player is doing. So I need a little bit of an edge in some way, right? Like I need to dictate things in some capacity, and that's how you dictate it, in my opinion. So
100%, you want to play your game.
Yeah, and you're joining a very talkative group. I'll say that. I know Benjamin Morris is not a huge talker, but like Jaden Mickey, he can talk, man. He can talk. So you guys are good. How about have you noticed? Because I know you obviously haven't played with him yet or really seen him play, but Leonard Moore, do you feel like he's a talker on the other side or not as much?
Leonard's not a talker. Leonard will tell you that he's more on the quiet side, but that's my boy. Like me, that's really that's my boy. Like me and him, first time we ever met, we clicked. Like he's a great kid. I'm excited to be able to be in the cornerback room with him. He's a great corner. He got length to him, size, technique. He's got all that. But no, is he a talker? No, he's not a talker. He's a silent killer.
Okay. Hey, man. As long as you get the job done, that's all that matters at the end 100%. Of the day. Last superlative that I have for you, and then I want to throw a couple of extra ones in here. Most likely to be the next Bill Gates.
All of us. All of us. We are going to win together, so all of us.
And you're all going to get that Notre Dame degree. So you're all going to be able to.
The Notre Dame degree. So we are going to be living like Bill.
Well, all right. So last couple, we gave us a great insight into a little bit of the Notre Dame players and the 2024 recruits. I'm going to give you two extra ones. This one is going to focus on the Notre Dame coaching staff that you've had the ability to grow relationships with. I know we're talking mostly with Coach Mickens, but I know obviously Coach Freeman, Coach Golden. I know you've gotten to know a lot of coaches so far. So biggest goofball of the Notre Dame coaching staff.
Chad Bowden.
Oh, really? Bowden. Easy?
No, that's not even a competition. Chad Bowden. There's nobody.
Well, here's a great follow-up question to that, because Notre Dame fans love Chad. They love him because he is an incredible recruiter, obviously, as the director of recruiting. What makes him so different or special? Like, how would you describe Chad Bowden?
He's not afraid to, tell you how things are, but at the same time, you know, when the first time I ever spoke with him, it wasn't like, "How you doing, coach?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Don't call me coach, just call me Chad." And at that point, I knew, like, well, I like this guy. And not only that, but it's the amount of effort and the amount of character and time that he puts in to his position. Because there's a lot of directors of recruiting around the country and in the nation, but when you have one that's passionate about each and every one of his kids and that calls all of us to make sure we're good, make sure we're getting on the phone with our coaches, making sure we're keeping up with our grades, and then keep us all together in the group chat just talking. Like, even today, he asked us, who's better, Michael Jordan or LeBron? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the director of recruiting taking time out of his day, out of all the stuff he's got going on to make sure his players are okay. It's just the type of passion you see that he puts into his job, into the program, to the team. Like, he's just him. But he is a goofball, though.
Well, I got to follow up with that now. Who's better, Michael Jordan or LeBron?
LeBron. By far. By far.
By far. Oh, nice. All right. We got a definitive one. It's like not even close.
19 all-time NBA, 4 rings, scoring leader, been to 10, been to 9. He's going 10 this year, right? And then he'll get his 5th ring this year after we beat the Warriors tonight. I'm a big LeBron fan. I just think some of the greatest person to walk on earth. I mean, I love LeBron.
I just look forward to a couple years when it's Bronny, right? Bronny's the oldest. He's gonna be playing against him probably pretty soon or with him at some point. So.
Probably with him. I say with him. I think that's gonna happen too.
It probably will.
Ever. I mean,
LeBron just averaged 29 points per game at like 38 years old, right? It's like he's not slowing down at all.
Mm-hmm.
So.
In this playoff, he's averaging 22, so he's still balling.
Yeah, no, he really is. And the Lakers have been a big surprise. I thought they weren't going to be that great in the playoffs just because it's a little bit older, but him and Anthony Davis have been playing fantastic in the playoffs. So
and when you got a guy like Lonnie Walker that can come off the bench and drop 15 in the 4th quarter, I mean, they got some special guys on that roster.
They
came out of nowhere.
Follow up on that one as well. If the Lakers don't win the NBA championship this year, who's your second favorite to win it? I'll tell you this, Karson. I live right outside of Philadelphia, so I am rooting for the Sixers. But we'll see.
But what I will say is I think it'll be if the Lakers don't make it, it'll be the Nuggets and the Sixers, right? So I think because I don't see the Suns. I don't see the Suns coming back winning another 2 games unless Katie and D-Book decide to go for 30 apiece. No. But for the Nuggets and the Sixers to play, the only way that the Nuggets will win is if Jokic outplays Joel Embiid, because I don't think the Nuggets have enough talent, like, you know what I mean, with point guard, shooting guard. They can't outdo what the Sixers have with James Harden. They can't. Nobody on their team is compatible with James Harden and Embiid to Jokic, and we're talking about Murray. Murray's a good player. James Harden's an elite player. Like, it's levels to it.
Yeah, James Harden's been so up and down this playoffs, but then you 45 one game, 42 the other, game-winning 3 and game 4. I mean,
he's balling right now.
He is. And I think that people would love that headline, though, of the Jokic versus Embiid, because obviously
MVP
Jokic,
former MVP. It's crazy. That'd be a great matchup.
And there were a lot of people. There were a lot of people this year that wanted Jokic to get the 3rd straight one, which I was fully on board with Embiid winning it this year. But that's just my opinion.
I think Jokic is. He could have got MVP, but I think sometimes it's more of a stat pad. Like, I feel like he's stat pad sometimes.
I agree there. Last one, superlative, and I'll let you get out of here. Most likely of the Notre Dame staff to win in a pickup basketball game.
I'm going with my coach, Coach Mickens. He's a baller.
Is he actually? Can he play basketball?
He's a baller. Yeah, he's an athlete. Real athlete. Coach Mick all the way.
Who's the best basketball player of the commits in the class right now, do you think?
Probably. Who's the only? I think Cam's the only one that plays, right?
I think he might be. Yeah, CJ doesn't play, does he? I don't think CJ plays.
Yeah, so probably Cam because he plays.
Okay.
Now, if we 1v1, I don't know if he's going to beat me, right? I don't ball no more, but I am a baller. I just got to work on my jump shot. But with him, I think he really plays basketball for real. So probably him.
So Cam Williams versus Coach Mick. You think Coach Mick could take him?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. We might have to do this again, man. I love these superlatives. I should have gotten like 10 more, but
I like them.
Yeah, I think it was a good first list, and I think it really is going to give a great glimpse into not only the players but the coaches. Karson, I asked you to do this last time, man. We're going to probably end most of the podcast off in this foot, brother. Notre Dame fans out there, people on Irish Breakdown Nation, people on the Irish Breakdown message board, where can they follow you on all your social media platforms?
So my Twitter is just Karson Hobbs, KRSONHOBBS, and my Instagram handle is Karson Hobbs 1. So same thing as my Twitter, just add a 1 to it. And yeah.
That's it. So we'll be back again next week with Karson Hobbs for Carson's Corner. Make sure all Notre Dame fans, if you were listening to this podcast, go give a 5-star review. Say you love Carson's Corner. Tag Karson on Twitter because he's very, very interactive on Twitter. Make sure you say everything, and we'll catch you all next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.
Go Irish.
All right, there you go. That was Carson's Corner with Ryan and Notre Dame commit Karson Hobbs. So we're going to move on. Obviously, Ryan, you already kind of sent us out. We're going to move on next to sort of an overview of the defense, but I do very much enjoy that kid. And he's one of those guys, like I've said this before, I'm curious to see how senior film goes, but man, I hope they're right about that kid because he's hard not to root for, man. Like he's really hard not to root for.
Well, I mean, I guess he's not as hard. I mean, some people aren't going to root for him at all since he just said LeBron was better than Jordan on the podcast.
Yeah.
So, it'll be.
He's young, man. What do you expect, right? I mean, he's like he never saw Michael Jordan play, huh?
Yeah. He brought it up, so I was just asking the question.
Of course he did. A lot of young people feel that way because they don't know any better. They didn't get a chance to experience the greatness of that era of basketball. But try not to hold those takes against them, against kids like that, because like I said, they don't know any better, right? So every generation goes through that.
Yeah.
So Ryan, let's move on to sort of the next topic. This is an interesting discussion to have because we need to talk about sort of the defensive class and the class overall and where Notre Dame is heading. It is kind of funny how we've kind of done a complete 180 from last year. And last year, kind of heading into April and May, was Tommy Rees sucks and this offensive staff can't recruit and they've got all these defensive players and the offensive staff only has like 3 guys and this guy can't play and I don't like that guy and all this other kind of stuff. And by the end of it, you're kind of like, I think the offensive class might be a little bit better than the defensive class. We're seeing something similar from the standpoint of numbers. Notre Dame is on a roll right now when it comes to defensive recruiting. In the last 2 months, Notre Dame, and it started with Anthony Knapp, the offensive lineman. They have also added 2 receivers in the last couple months, obviously Isaiah Kenyon and Micah Gilbert, but the defensive class has really started to fill up, Ryan. You went from having nearly 3 commits for a while. I mean, when Leonard Moore committed back in when was that, like February?
Yeah, it was like February, yeah.
February, early March or something like that. It was like, okay, when are they going to get somebody? And then, of course, Cole Mullins commits, Bryce Young commits, then Kennedy Urlacher commits, and then they've landed 2 linebacker commits in the last 2 weeks, or last week. And it's now 8-8. There's 8 offensive commits and 8 defensive commits. The one thing that has to be said is when you look at the 2, the one difference between last year is when the offensive class started to fill up, they started to fill up with like big time players.
Dudes. Right.
It was Braylon James. It was Jaden Greathouse. And I'm not necessarily seeing that on the defensive side of the ball. And so I want to talk about sort of why and what they need to finish with, in my opinion, to really raise the level of where this class is, but also why it could be challenging. And we'll get into that. I think the first thing that people need to take into account, in my opinion, is, Ryan, you talk about this with the draft a lot. There's some years where it's just not a good year.
Yeah.
This year at quarterback, for example, is a pretty good year at the top, but it doesn't have the depth from what I've seen so far of like last year's class, for example, or next year's class. There's almost always deep receiver classes. It's just the way that it is now. But when I evaluate and we've talked about this quite a bit already, but when I evaluate the class nationally, part of the issue that Notre Dame is having is that some of the positions where there's some consternation about how Notre Dame is recruiting is because it's not a great year. And honestly, outside of defensive end, I think it's a pretty good defensive end class, actually.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty good cornerback class, right? I don't know if there's a lot of elite top 5-star guys, but it's a very deep cornerback class in my opinion. But defensive tackle, linebacker, and safety especially, it's just not a good year. And just there's not a ton of depth. There's not a lot of high-end players. And you made a point too, Ryan, at the beginning when you and I were talking too, that there's other aspects that kind of hurt, like when you look at safety, that hurt the depth of that class as well.
Yeah. I mean, and that's talking about guys like Mike Matthews. I mean, even Bronte Johnson to a degree that some schools are recruiting
Aaron
them as
Butler.
a wide receiver, right?
Yeah.
And Aaron Butler is another defensive back, obviously out of California. I mean, there are some guys that are just kind of dead set on playing on the offensive side of the football. So I think that is hurting the depth of defensive back just in general, but especially safety. I mean, if Mike Matthews was just a safety in this class, I mean, I would argue that you have a legit 5-star talent at the top of the class. But unfortunately, when you lose him, there's still quality guys like the KJ Boldens of the world, right? Then you get into the DeMello Joneses, the Ricardo Jones. Like it still has some talent, but it's not quite as
and that's
flashy
always going to be the case, right? It's never going to be a year where there's no good players in a class.
Exactly.
It's just not a great year. It's not a deep year. And I'll say this is kind of the second year in a row I've been somewhat disappointed with the high level quality of linebackers, to be honest with you. And I think this year's class is worse than last year's class, because last year's class still had some guys at the top that were just really good dudes. I mean, you had the Harold Perkinses, you had the Drake Bowens, the Jaden Alsburys, the Anthony Hills, who was very toolsy, but kind of raw.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good linebackers in last year's class. There's not as many that I see in this year's class, and the depth isn't as good. And defensive tackle too might take the cake as far as just lack of depth, of quality depth at defensive tackle, pure interior guys. There's a lot of big ends you're going to have to develop into interior guys. And so that has to be taken into consideration when you're talking about why are they taking some guys that are more projectable. And this is exactly why, because the guys in the top of the class are not the high quality that we've seen in past years. This is a much better 2024 nationally, much better offensive skill class than it is anywhere else. And quarterback is good, running back is good, receivers really good, tight ends really good. It's not a very good offensive line class. It's not a very good D tackle class. It's not a very good linebacker class, and it's not a very good safety class. And so what Notre Dame is doing, and you have to keep this in mind when we're talking about who they're recruiting. Do you take a good, solid player that might have a high ranking or whatever, or do you say, hey, we're going to take some chances on some higher ranked kids? Or not some higher ranked kids, some higher ceiling kids who are a bit projectable because we don't see the depth there. And we got to take some chances because there are also numbers needs. And I think this puts them in an even more precarious position at safety because they can't afford to only get low floor, high ceiling guys at safety. Linebacker's a different deal. We talked earlier. I think they need to get a high floor guy. They need to get Kingston. Like, it's simple as that. They need to get Kingston.
Yeah.
But when you look at it, it's like, I can live with it if they get a Chris Cole. I can certainly live with that, Brian Huff, because of how well you did in the past 2 years. It's still a little bit of a concern if you get nothing but projectable guys. Safety is a little different animal, Ryan. Even with the pickup of Antonio Carter, who has 2 years of eligibility left, that's a position I'm concerned with because I don't know who they're going to get. The one guy they do have is a projectable guy, and I don't see a lot of come in and play early guys, to be honest with you. And so I do think they're hurting a little bit because of that. And some of the guys that you do like that to me do have higher floors, a Jalen McClain, you haven't been able to get any traction with. And so I have some concerns about how if they're going to be able to finish this class off the way that a lot of people think that there should. And part of it is, I mean, look, people, NIL. I have seen very few NIL problems in this class. There's a couple, Jalen, but the way that last year played out for NIL has changed the game in ways that fans aren't recognizing.
Sure.
In that so many kids, and you've heard kids talk about this, Ryan, so many kids saw what happened with the Jaden Rashadas, that they were promised A, B, C, and D, and then it didn't deliver, that they realized that there's a lot of BS out there. And so NIL still matters to these kids, but it's not having the same impact that it did with some others. It still matters, but it's just not a great year. And I just don't think that the staff right now, honestly, has been able to resonate with some of those top players. If we're being honest, I think there's been some issues there. There's been some issues connecting with some of the top linebackers in the class, to be completely honest with you. Yeah. There's been an issue connecting with some of the top safeties in the class. And so it's a little concerning. And we're going to have to see how the staff is going to finish, because there's an opportunity with the players on the board for this to be a really good defensive class.
Agree.
But we're getting to that point now, Ryan, over the next couple months, where they're getting to the point where if you don't hit here, and here, I don't see the path for that continuing. And that's something that we're gonna kind of discuss in this next section, Ryan. And but to kind of go back to the original topic of conversation, Bodie Kahoun is a guy that I think clearly has brought about a difference of opinion with people of his film.
Sure.
But the one thing that cannot be like you have to accept and embrace, to at least, like, if we're going to have a debate, we need to be able to accept certain premises. So if you and I are going to debate whether or not Bodie Kahoun is a guy that Notre Dame should take, or whether it's a guy that could be an impact player, you and I have to accept certain premises in the conversation, right? We have to accept, okay, he's a 2024 kid. We have to accept this, and this. We also have to accept the fact that this is a guy that Notre Dame staff has wanted for months.
Right.
This is not a guy that will hold him off until we hear about other kids. He is in the group of the other kids that you're referring to. You may not think that, but that's how they think. Like I saw somebody on the board said, boy, I thought when they got Teddy Rizak, they were going to go all in on Chris Cole and Kingston Viliama Asa. That was what you thought they would do.
Yeah.
But there was never a debate about whether or not Bodie Kahoun was a guy they liked. I think there could be a debate of whether they should have felt that way. But this is not a situation where they're settling. They see a kid with a very high ceiling. We're going to find out if they're right or not, but that's what they see. And that's kind of what they're shooting for at some of these positions. But when it comes to Bodie Kahoun, this is a guy that they've wanted for a while. And, you know, I want to ask you this, because to me, Peyton Pierce is a guy they liked very early.
Yes.
I think that was James Laurinaitis. I think liked him more than some of the other coaches, to be completely honest with you, which is why when James left, Notre Dame didn't push as hard for him, to be completely honest with you, because there were some other people that didn't like Peyton Pierce as much. I like Peyton Pierce, but
I like him too.
I think the upside is not as good, as high. You know, he's a little bit more limited physically. The ranking's a little higher, but there were people on this staff, and this is true. Again, we can discuss if they were correct or not, and we'll find out. There were people on this staff, even when it looked like, well, I'll be honest, even when Peyton Pierce was a committed player, there were people on the Notre Dame staff that liked Bodie Kahoun more and weren't sold on Peyton Pierce. Because the thing about Peyton Pierce is he's a very good high school linebacker.
Yes.
But if you want to compare a guy to Drew White, Peyton Pierce is that guy. He is much more like J.D. Bertrand and Drew White than Bodie Kahoun is, because he's short, he's not overly long, and he's a good athlete, but not a great athlete. But he's very instinctive and very productive. That's the reality of it. That's more of the BK guy than what this kid is, who's 6'3", long, rangy, and those type of things. And so that's kind of where the conversation is. And there are people in this chat that would have been much happier with Peyton Pierce than Bodie Kahoun because he's ranked higher. Yeah. Simple as that. Because Ohio State wanted him. Ohio State didn't want Peyton Pierce until James Laurinaitis got hired, which is why they offered him like 2 days before it was announced that James Laurinaitis was going to be their new GA. It's not a coincidence. They didn't offer him before then, right? So, you know, that to me, that has to be taken into consideration when you're talking about linebacker class. But it does put a lot of pressure on you now to go get Kingston. Because, again, it's going to be hard for me to say this is a big-time defensive class if you don't have some guys like him in this class. And right now, they don't have anybody like him in this class, which is that combination of high floor plus high ceiling. And that's the concern I have so far when it comes to defensive recruiting for Notre Dame in this class.
This is a belief I have, and I think it's a very understandable belief, is that there are some positions right now on Notre Dame's roster that people are very worried about because they're not sure about the people that are developing it, right? If I believe, and this is my opinion, I could be completely wrong about this. Perception could be, I could be completely off on this one. But I think if Marcus Freeman was still the defensive coordinator of Notre Dame and still the linebacker coach, if he brought in Teddy Rizak and Bodie Kahoun onto his roster, people would have said Marcus Freeman's going to get the best out of them because he had proven that he could develop players and that he could put guys in great positions. I think that people would have been a lot more eased, in my opinion, Brian, of like, Coach Freeman sees his guys. He's going to get his guys. He'll develop his guys. We'll be good at linebacker, even if it's Teddy Rizak and Bodie Kahoun. But the fact that you just went through your first year with Al Golden and the linebacker play was sporadic. It wasn't consistent. I think that there was some hesitation of like, cool, I can see the upside with Teddy Rizak. I can see the upside of Bodie Kahoun, but do I trust them to develop him properly? I'm not sure about that.
So what you're saying is if Marcus Freeman was still the linebackers coach and was driving these recruitments, or Clark Lee, there'd be a much more willing to accept that. I think that's very fair.
Because they would look at Bodie Kahoun, they'd be like, so you're going to get a 6'2.5", 6'3" kid who can run in the 4.5s with Marcus Freeman? Like, he'll develop that kid. He'll be a great player. I think that's how they feel.
I think the perception is that you're selling for this kid because Al Golden doesn't want to recruit. And look, Al Golden doesn't want to recruit. It's obvious. I don't like it. And people from Notre Dame may not like me saying this. They may want to push back on it. But the fact of the matter is, that's the evidence of what we see. But he's not the only person recruiting linebackers.
Right.
Chad, when we talk to Teddy Rizak, who's the name he always mentions? Who is your primary recruiter? Ask him. He won't say Al Golden. He won't say Max Bulla. He won't say Marcus Freeman. He'll say Chad Bowden.
Chad Bowden, yeah.
Because Chad Bowden is the guy that saw that and I evaluated that. And then obviously everybody was on board with it. Bodie Kahoun has been much more about Al Golden. Al Golden was involved in this one. But who's the first name he mentioned to you multiple times when you interviewed him today? Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman.
Yep.
But fairly, fans don't have the faith in Al Golden because he hasn't earned it.
I get that. Yeah.
I mean, and that's fair. He hasn't earned it, Ryan. And I got no pushback on that. He has to earn it. So and that was my issue with Cole Sullivan. When I find out that Al Golden really likes Cole Sullivan, sorry, you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt with him like Mike Mickens gets with me for Karson Hobbs, right? Like I've said this before. Karson Hobbs' film doesn't blow me away. Now, I have heard some things about what he's doing in track right now that tells me that what I was told by some sources as what they liked is this kid has a profile that they've recruited in the past. That as he gets older, the speed is going to come. I was told this by some folks that recruited Sauce Gardner. He was not fast coming out of high school. But they saw a profile that once he got into a college weight program that he was going to take off speed wise. And that's what I keep getting told about Karson Hobbs. But you know what? I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt with Karson Hobbs. Now, my ranking is still where it is. He is the lowest ranked kid I have in this class. Karson Hobbs is. However, I'm okay with it because I trust the guy making the evaluation. I don't have that same trust with Al Golden. And so I can't fault Notre Dame fans for feeling the exact same way when it comes to Al Golden because he has not earned that trust. And I think that's where some of this stuff comes from. But I will say this. There is no doubt, and it can't be disputed or argued at all, that Marcus Freeman wasn't very involved in this evaluation and recruitment of adding Bodie Kahoun to this class. This was not an Al Golden deal. This was a Notre Dame. There's no one that I've talked to at Notre Dame that looks at him and isn't on board. That was not the case with Peyton Pierce. That is the case with Bodie Kahoun. Now, again, we'll find out if they are correct or not. Yeah. But I do think that has to be discussed. This is not an Al Golden only guy when it comes to recruitment. But the thing you brought up about the coaching aspect of it, Ryan, still obviously plays in because he's still the defensive coordinator.
Well, yes, because the long-term development is more, I think, of the biggest question mark. But to your point, Brian, is that literally in that piece, I got mentioned 4 different guys that he had been developing deep relationships with. You know what that tells me is that Marcus Freeman's like, hey guys, that guy,
Yes.
let's get on that guy,
Right.
right? As a collective, as a staff, we need to make sure that Bodie Kahoun understands that he is a priority for Notre Dame, to your point, right? And we'll be able to look back on it and we'll be able to diagnose, who was right, who was wrong, and what went wrong, what went right, all that great conversation. And it will be a great conversation at that point. But I think the core of this conversation is coming from, back to my original point, is that I believe if Marcus Freeman was still the linebacker coach, people would be a lot more good with this, right? Last year's defensive line class had a lot of talent, man. That was a talented group. But it's the fact of, can Al Washington get the most out of it? We're not sure about that.
It was twofold. It was the losses.
Yes.
And then the fact that I don't trust him to develop these guys the way that I trusted Mike Elston. That's what a lot of people felt. And that's fair. And that's very fair.
Very fair.
And we'll see if that changes with Coach Washington moving forward. And Coach Golden's going to have to do the same thing.
Trust is built over time, man. You don't just gain it in a day.
And I've had people say this to me, well, I'm more willing to take chances on some safeties because they do trust Chris O'Leary as a coach. I just don't trust him as a recruiter.
Right.
And I don't think he's a good enough coach to get away with just the poor recruiting we've seen so far from him. But that's a different conversation for a different day. I think if you're going to look at this defensive class, Ryan, if it's going to be successful, they have to have some hits right now, some big hits right now. And let's start up front and we'll work our way back.
Sure.
Obviously, let's go outside in, start on defensive end. There's really 3 ends on the board: Logan Thomas, Malachi Williams, and Elijah Rushing. To me, you get one of those 3 guys, any one of those 3 guys. This is a good defensive end class. I'm a lot higher on Cole Mullins than the national recruiting. And I've said this, he's my Benjamin Morrison this year. He's my guy that when I look at the film, I say, I don't know what they're missing, but I see a guy that's a really good football player. Now, he doesn't grade out quite as high as Benjamin did for me. Benjamin was a top 100 guy with 5-star upside. Cole is a 4.5-star upside guy that's a top 150. And he's borderline top 100 on my grading system because I have different things that I grade. It's not just like a gut. I have a grading system, and where you fall, he's like really close to being in that top 100 range. I love the kid's film. So, part of that is some people may not like him. He's ranked here or there. I love the kid's film. I'm on board with that one. Bryce Young is a projectable kid. He's not a 4-star for me yet, even though everyone now ranks him as a 4-star. The reason for that is, Ryan, is because if I was doing one grade, Bryce Young would be a 4-star for me because I would then put the upside into the ranking. And his upside is very high, which would then drag his overall grade up to a 4-star. Is that fair?
Yes.
But that's why we do the two different systems, because you need to understand where he is now is not where you hope he can be. And he's one of those kids that him and Teddy Rizak have the 2 biggest floor to ceiling grades right now, or current to future grades right now. They're both 3.5 stars with 4.5-star upsides.
Yeah.
Most kids are like 3.5 to 4, 4 to 4.5, things like that. They are full grade higher. But I love Cole Mullins. I love that pickup. I like Bryce Young. The upside is really high. I do love the upside there. I think there's a chance he could end up growing into an inside guy, which is where I think Notre Dame is kind of going with recruiting. If you look at their board for 24 and 25, they're recruiting a lot of big ends. And outside of Davion Dixon, they're not recruiting a lot of pure ends. Even Owen Wafel's not a pure inside guy. He was defensive end in high school. They're not recruiting a lot of pure inside guys, Ryan. And I think the reason is they want to recruit a lot of big ends, and then they grow into big interior guys so they're more athletic, but still have the length and size that they want. And I think Bryce could end up being one of those guys like his dad. And if it, you can't ignore the fact that him and his dad were almost the same size, except Bryce is about 2 inches taller coming out of high school. And then his dad was a 300-pounder when it was all said and done. You can't ignore that, in my opinion. And so I'm not going to ignore that. So I do think there's still an opportunity that he ends up growing into being that kind of player. We'll see how it plays out. But you add a Logan Thomas, who's a top 100 recruit. You add a Malachi Williams, who you and I have said has a ceiling as high as any. He's the lowest of the floor of the defensive ends on the board, in my opinion, remaining. but
Yep.
the ceiling is as high as anybody. And then, of course, Elijah Rushing, who's one of those high floor and high ceiling guys. I would also throw Logan Thomas into that conversation, Ryan. He's got a little higher floor to me just because of the athleticism and the versatility, but he's not necessarily a day one guy for me, but he's easy to project for me. It's just he's got one thing. Matt Bayless needs to do his thing with him. But the technique, the explosiveness, all that's there. It's just he's going to need a year in the weight room. And if he's an early enrollee, then he can be a guy that helps out early on, in my opinion, in that regard. But you got to get one of those three guys for me. And if you do, I feel really good about this defensive end class. And if you can get two, now that's a grand slam home run. I say grand slam. That's a home run for sure if you get two of those guys. And you add them with Cole Mullins and Bryce Young.
Well, I mean, because all three of those players give you something that you don't have enough of on this roster, right? It's those Viper types that are just incredibly long and athletic, the true outside track type of kids. I mean, because right now your roster is, because Joshua Burnham has some nice length to him now playing Viper, but you are built up of more of a Jordan Botelho types that are just more of, 6'2", 255 pounds, kind of that versatile player, right? And Logan Thomas does bring versatility, but he brings it in a 6'4" with long arms package. And Elijah Rushing is every bit of 6'5 and a half, 6'6", and 235 pounds right now and long. Malachi Williams is 6'5", 230 pounds and super, super long. So you are adding an element potentially to your room of any of those kids that you don't have enough of on the roster. You have plenty of strong side defensive ends that are stupid long. I mean, just look at the 2023 class of Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam, Brendan Vernon. Like, you have that type now in the room. But you don't have the Vipers that look the part of an NFL defensive end. You have more kind of hybrid players. And I think Notre Dame is moving to try to get those long, twitchier pass rushers in that Viper spot. And those three all fit that bill. Again, all of them are at least 6'4". They all are long. I would guess all of them have 33+ inch arms. I mean, I'll say this. I don't know what the measurement is exactly, but I would be surprised if Malachi Williams didn't have around 35-inch arms. Like, he is incredibly long. So all those three guys bring similar qualities in that sense. Different players. Like you said, Logan Thomas has been used much more of a 3-4 outside linebacker role, can drop back into coverage, can do stuff in space a little bit more. Malachi and Elijah Rushing are your true hand in the dirt, get after the quarterback types. But regardless, you're getting qualities that all of them have that are similar, that twitchiness, that length, and you need more of that at the Viper position. A spot in the 2023 class Notre Dame missed on. When Keon Kelly decommitted, they just were not able to fill the Viper role in their 2023 class. Still a very talented defensive line group. But if you get one of those, I agree. It's a good class and you're excited. If you get two of those, then man, we're cooking now. We are cooking if you get two of those guys. And it's a need in this class. It's an absolute necessity for Coach Washington and the rest of the defensive staff to get at least one of those guys that can really press the pocket on an outside track.
Mm-hmm. Let's move inside, Ryan. And this is the interesting one. This is the one where this could to some degree make or break your defensive class, in my opinion. That's Justin Scott. That's the only interior guy on the board right now. This is a one. Look, everybody that I talk to, all my sources, and we put this on the board. All my sources feel really good about where Notre Dame stands on this one. They do.
Yes. Yep.
But here's my concern. I have no reason to doubt them. My sources have always been very honest with me. When they're not in a good position, they tell me. They're not sunshine and rainbows. We think we're going to get everybody. I mean, I talked to a source today. How do you feel about Elijah Rushing? I don't think we're going to get him. Right. Well, you got all these people putting crystal balls and saying that you're doing. Yeah, I mean, I hear all that, but we got a lot of work to do. Right. So these are honest people. They're not like, man, if we wanted, we could get Malachi Logan. That's not who they are. They feel they're in a good position with Justin Scott. I, however, have concerns because, like, I don't care if Justin takes an official visit to Notre Dame in June. I don't. I could not care less. I do have a problem, however, that we're going to go April, May, and June, and he hasn't been on campus. And talking about coming on campus in the fall. Now, two problems with that. Number one is what I'm told is he's now going to, the thought is, now again, these things always change, right? Because Bodie Kahoun was going to decide later in the summer, right? And he's now deciding on May 15th. So these things could always change. But originally, Justin was talking about wanting to have a decision by the summer. Now he's talking about wanting to decide going into the fall and taking more visits in the fall. Well, usually that means a kid is enjoying the recruiting process. That doesn't usually work out well for Notre Dame. It just doesn't. I mean, look, maybe it's different under Marcus Freeman, but it wasn't last year. All the guys that wanted to carry the process out, they pretty much lost almost all of them, except for maybe Jeremiah Love, maybe. But I don't think Jeremiah Love necessarily loved the process. I think he was a smart, thoughtful kid who was doing his due diligence. And I think there's some of that to Justin as well. I think Justin is a smart, thoughtful kid, a thoughtful family that they want to make sure that they're making the right decision and they want to see the process through. But I also think there's a part of it that he's kind of enjoying getting out and seeing everywhere. That's fine. No problem with that. It's not a negative. It doesn't make him a bad kid. Oh, he's got his hand out. All that's, forget all that. Come on now.
Christian Gray and his family wanted to see everything too.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, but it does get concerning when you talk about a kid that wants to carry his recruitment in the fall. Notre Dame just doesn't win a ton of those battles. Now, they did win the Jeremiah Love one. They got him the weekend that they played Stanford. That was a September, October type of thing. But it normally doesn't work out for Notre Dame. And the fact that he has not been on campus. When was the last time he was on campus? Was it in March? Brian, I'm trying to.
Yeah, it was March. It was March.
It was March 25th was the last time he's been on campus. And I'm supposed to believe that he chose not to come on campus in April. He's choosing not to come on campus in May. And he's choosing not to come on campus in June. Is somehow I'm not supposed to be concerned about that. I would be doing a disservice to our fans here if I were to say nothing to worry about.
Right.
So I'm going to tell you both sides. I'm being told by my sources who are very honest and very fair and do not give me spin. Do not give me pro Notre Dame spin. They tell me exactly where they think things stand. They feel really good about where they stand with Justin Scott. That's what gives me hope and gives me confidence, because some of the people I talked to are also the first ones that told me, hey, this Jason Moore thing is not going the way that I was hoping it would go. Right. So they're honest with me. They feel good. Ryan, I have a hard time getting myself to there now that he's decided not to be. Like when I thought he was coming in June, I was like, it's all good. He's going to come in June. It's going to be good. But now you're going to go minimum 3-4 months before you're back on campus. Minimum. We're probably talking closer to 6 months. If he was here March 25th, when's he going to come back? In September?
Right.
It's over 5 months. That's a problem. I mean, Logan Thomas is getting ready to make his second trip up on his own dime in May. Then he's coming back for an official visit in June from Texas.
Yes. From
Katy, Texas. But a kid who lives an hour and a half away has been here once in the 2023 calendar year, right?
Yep.
Did he come in late January? Yeah, was he here that weekend in late January when Notre Dame had that big visit? Did he not show up for that?
I don't think he showed up for that one.
He was slated to come, but ended up not coming, right?
Yep.
So he's been on campus. So from January 1st to now looking to September, if you're not able to get him on campus but once, that's going to be tough. Now, the people say, they have no chance. That's also nonsense.
Right.
Because the communication is still very strong. That is the good thing there, Ryan. But that's what gives me pause. You've got to but you got to win that one. They cannot afford to not get Justin Scott. It would be an epic failure, in my opinion. And so they're still confident they're going to get him. I just am a little bit more nervous now than I was maybe a month ago about that one. Right.
Agree. I mean, this is one of those situations where, I mean, we're talking about a kid that's an hour and a half away, right, Brian? Like you can get to Notre Dame and back in a tank of gas. Like that's kind of where we are with the situation, right? Like this is honestly one of those scenarios where, I mean, literally he can make a day trip out of it, right? Like some kids, to your point, like Logan Thomas, you can't make a day trip out of coming from Katy, Texas to South Bend, Indiana. You can't make that happen, but a kid from Chicago can make that happen if you choose to. So anytime that it's this difficult to get a kid back on campus that is so close as far as regionally to you, it has to give you pause. It has to. So today, do you still feel okay about where Notre Dame is with Justin Scott? Yes, I still think that Notre Dame is in the fight with Justin Scott. I still think that they're probably his leader right now. But if they don't get him back on campus over the next couple months, that's not great, man. Like, that's not great. I mean, there's no other way to paint it, guys. Like, this is a situation where, and we saw this in 2023 a little bit with a couple recruits where actions speak much louder than words. There's a couple recruits that you talk to every single time that's like, oh man, I'm locked in. I'm locked in. No worries. I'm locked in. But you're not going back, right? You're still taking visits. Like there's just an eerie feeling there. And I feel like that is kind of where you are with Justin Scott. You still feel good about Notre Dame's chances, but you would be irresponsible to say that there's no concern at all. Like if there's no concern, he's going to end up with Notre Dame no matter what. It's a little unsettling. I think unsettling is the word to use in this recruitment.
So we'll see how that one plays out, but that's a key to this class overall, Ryan. You're going to have a hard time telling me this is because what it'll turn out to be is if they finish in the other areas that we're going to talk about, it'll turn into a situation where, man, you really like this class, but you didn't get a Viper, you didn't get Keon.
Right.
If they hit at linebacker, if they get Kingston and get Logan Thomas and get rushing and get the safeties who want, it'll be like, man, it's a really good defensive class, but they didn't get Justin Scott. It'll always have that little stain of, man, you didn't get that guy. That's the key. And so at the end of the day, that's going to be the test for Al Washington. If Al Washington wants to completely change sort of the tenor of how people view him, that's the one you win. That's the one you have to win. And if you're Marcus Freeman and you're going to say to us, hey, I'm the number one recruiter for all of these guys, this is one you have to win. You cannot let a Southern school come into your backyard and beat you for a Catholic school kid from Chicago. You can't.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I will say this. So I gave you the positive. My Notre Dame sources who are really good and really accurate and really honest feel really good. I gave you the concern that I have, just having done this a long time and just seeing how these things tend to play out for Notre Dame. Here's the third piece of this. I think this team is going to be really freaking good. And if Justin Scott carries his recruitment into the fall, I think that's going to bode well for Notre Dame because of the product on the field is going to be really good. And I think one of the top contenders for him is going to be Ohio State. And you got a chance to show him in a head-to-head matchup, this is why you need to come here. Or not. Or we're not there yet. And that's going to be big. So I think for a guy like Justin Scott, this season could end up being a much more impactful than we thought it was going to be, Ryan. And so we'll kind of have to see. We're going to have to see how that one plays out. We'll have to see how it plays out. But I'm not panicking. I'm not reacting like some of the show. Oh, they got no chance. That's your own thing you got to deal with. But I have a more doubt now than I did before.
Yeah.
But everybody I talk to still thinks they're going to get him. Let's move to the next level, Ryan. We talked about this, and we need to spend a lot of time. They got to get Kingston. Don't get Kingston, and I have questions about this linebacker class. Get Kingston, and I'm good with this linebacker class. Hey, you know what? You took a couple flyers and some really high-ceiling kids. We'll see if they pan out or not. You and I have a difference of opinion. I'm higher on Teddy than you are. You're a little even higher on Bodie than I am. But there's a lot of athleticism. I mean, we're talking about two kids who have verified electronic 4.5s at linebacker, right? And some people said, well, you know, the time on Bodie is like the film on Bodie as a safety. He's not that guy anymore. Well, he ran the 4.5 this past summer before his junior season. So you can't tell me that he lost that speed in 2 weeks when fall camp started, right? Or in a month when fall camp started. So, you know, we'll see. You're getting athleticism, and then if you get Kingston, you get the high ceiling. Cornerback, love Leonard Moore. Very high on Leonard Moore. Karson Hobbs, we've talked about. Staff is very high on him. I have to be sold, although he's one of those guys that his senior year is going to be very important for me, like it was for Ben Minich. I wasn't very excited when they got Ben Minich last year. I wasn't.
Yep.
But I was told, just watch his senior year. This kid's better than you think. Have an open mind. And I did, and came away. Ben Minich is a good football player. He jumped up to a 4-star grade for me. And that's where I'm at with Karson Hobbs, right? So, and Leonard Moore. And then obviously there's Caleb Beasley. And that to me, Now, here's an interesting one, Ryan. Have you looked at the rankings for Caleb Beasley? Like the national rankings, right? For not really. It's actually settling in on him. Not like he's ranked 247 has him at 102, but everyone else has him at between 153 and 244. Very surprised to see his ranking go that way. He's a bona fide top 100 player to me.
Same.
And so I'm not quite sure what people are saying. And that's based off what I saw in film, and that's based on what I saw at Irish Invasion in person. He's a big one for me because it signifies two things. Number one is you're getting another really good corner.
Yes.
And number two, it would say you had to go out and beat an SEC school in their backyard for a kid like that.
That just won 10+ games last year. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Beat Bama, did all that stuff. It would signify that too. So that to me is the one where I say, hey, I follow politics stuff, Ryan, and there's like these bellwether states and bellwether counties. Like if you win that, you're going to probably win, whatever. This is one of those bellwether recruits for me, right? Like how you finish with him is going to tell us if you're starting to turn that corner a little bit. Because this is one of those kids, Ryan. This is a Notre Dame kid.
Yep. He
just happens to be in the backyard of an ascending SEC team, and you've got to convince him that he's a Notre Dame kid. Where with Christian Gray was getting that pull from Ohio State and LSU, but he's a Missouri kid.
Yep.
So it's a little easier to me to kind of win that battle. This is a little different one because he's literally in the backyard of Tennessee. He's a Nashville kid. And so this is going to be very, very telling for me on the kind of staff this is, right? On the ability of the staff to really close on a kid like him. And it'll obviously impact the dynamic of the class as well. You need a kid. You need to flip somebody, right? You need to have the Notre Dame start showing the ability to win these battles. And they did that last year. They flipped plenty of kids. Flipped Kenny Minchie. Obviously, you flipped him from Pitt. They had other kids that they flipped in the last couple of years. You've got to be able to flip some of those kids, Ryan, if you're going to have these successes. And to me, the guy that I have kind of zeroed in as my flip guy for this class is that one right there. They flipped Caleb Smith from Texas Tech. I'm trying to look at some of the other guys.
Armel Mookum from Stanford.
Armel Mookum, they flipped from Stanford, exactly. I'm looking at a couple of others. I think those are it.
They technically flipped Bubakar from Boston College. It wasn't like one day type of thing. But
I mean, it was Notre Dame's interest that kind of caused him to flip a little bit. We've seen them flip guys in 2022. Junior Tuihalamaka is the guy they flipped as soon as Marcus Freeman got involved, is when he kind of decommitted and made his move. Eventually made his move into the class. So you've been able to go do that. Now you have Holden Stace. They somewhat kind of flipped from Penn State, but it wasn't directly because of Penn State. So now you've got to go out and show that you can do that. And he's the kind of kid that can. Oh, Karson Hobbs in this class from South Carolina. Yep. Adam Blair just mentioned that one. I always forget that he was committed to South Carolina. Completely forget that he was committed
for a while too to South Carolina.
Long time. Yeah, long time. Good call, Adam.
Yeah.
Let's move on to safety, Ryan. This is an interesting one because there's a lot of guys on the board that Notre Dame has a good shot with, but there's really no one on the board right now that I would say definitively, kind of like how we felt with Bodie Kahoun. It was always a matter of when. For the last 2 months, would you say, Ryan, with Bodie Kahoun, it was more of a matter of when, not if.
Yes.
They were going to get him. Yep. With Bryce Young, it was a matter of when, not if. You say, okay, well, this is dragging on a little bit more, but this kid's been silently committed for a while. With safety, there's not a lot of kids that I say right now, like, yeah, it's a matter of when, not if. They're going to have to legitimately close. And right now, I don't know that this staff has really shown me the ability to close on kids that they aren't kind of getting in on before everybody else does. And right now, they're going to have to actually out-recruit some really good programs if they're going to finish with a good safety class. And that, to me, is probably the biggest concern that I have right now when it comes to filling out this class. Obviously, Justin Scott's the biggest individual one, but I feel better about where they are with Justin Scott, even with all the hesitations, than I do with most of the safeties on the board.
That's true. Well, and I was actually going to work on a piece about the clarity that you're going to get in June from the safety position, Brian. Because to your point, I mean, Notre Dame's top targets are all going to be on campus for official visits, right? I mean, you talk about Davis Andrews is going to be back on campus. Jalen McClain is going to be on campus. You're going to have Paul Menke that's going to be back on campus. Like, there's a lot of guys.
Oliver Miles.
Oliver Miles.
Really likes,
yeah. So there's going to be a lot of the top safeties on the board for Notre Dame that are going to be making the trip. Marquise Gallegos is another kid out of California that is going to be taking an official visit in June. So you're going to get a really good understanding of what the class may look like after that, right? What the clarity, I think, is the biggest thing that you're trying to look for, because safety is such a big year in 2024. Yeah. I mean, like, we've talked about this endlessly. You struck out a couple years ago. Last year, you lost 2 commitments. Well, you lost 1 at signing day, and then obviously the situation with Brandon Hillman, you end up not getting Peyton Bowen or Brandon Hillman in last year's class. Still got 2 quality safeties in Don Schuler and Ben Minich, but like, you need to get impact players and depth in this class, especially with, you know, obviously the defections you've had in recruiting and on the roster over the last couple of years. So you look at those types of players, the Davis Andrews of the world. Can you make a big push with Jalen McClain? Like, can you make your push during that signing day? Is Paul Menke a guy that you want in the class? Is Marquise Gallegos a guy that you want to close on in the class? We have a lot more question marks than answers in safety recruiting in 2024. That's the best way I would put it. But I really think after that, because most of those guys are also visiting early on. Like, a couple of those guys are during that June 9th to 11th weekend. So early on to the midsection of June, we're going to get a very in-depth understanding of what the safety board is going to ultimately end up looking like. There's a lot of talented names, to your point, Brian, but there's not a lot of answers in this class right now. And Notre Dame needs to start finding an answer at safety, because that is one position that they have struggled mightily, obviously, recruiting over the last 2 years.
The concern I have, Ryan, is that you're going to see them potentially take some guys that maybe are like an Oliver Miles, who is a very athletic player, but is a bit of a project, in my opinion, because he's more Ramon Henderson than he is Xavier Watts, if that makes sense. Like, he's more track athlete, fast, than he is really natural football player. But I think that's kind of where they are right now in this class, because it's not a great year at safety that they're saying, so do we take a kid that's a good, like Marquise Gallegos, to me, is one of the best football. And, you know, I've been high on him in certain areas for a long time. And his film to me is really impressive.
Incredibly
He's
instinctive.
He can move. Yeah. He's just really small. That's my concern, Marquise Gallegos, really small. And so you question, how high is the floor really, or how high is the upside? The floor is good. You know, there's Davis Andrews, who to me is both. Floor and ceiling are both high. I'm a big fan of Davis Andrews. DeJuan Lane has an incredibly high ceiling. Floor's kind of in the middle, but very high ceiling. You know, Oliver Miles might have the biggest gap between floor and ceiling of anybody that they're recruiting right now, Ryan. Yeah. I mean, I see the athleticism, and if he figures out how to play football, he could be really good, but he could also be a guy that struggles even get on special teams because he's just so raw at football. You know, Paul Menke, higher floor, lower ceiling. You know, that there's such a difference of opinion of type of player that they're after. You worry that they're going to end up taking a bunch of guys that, to me, are going to be sort of those projectable kids. Because the reality is, Ryan, they need guys that can come in and play. At least one guy in this safety class is probably going to have to come in and be in the rotation in his first year. Or at least he'll have a shot too. And so that's really where my big concern is here, on top of the fact that I just don't know where they stand. Like, I like where Notre Dame is at right now with Davis Andrews, but I don't have the confidence in Davis Andrews that I had with like Bodie Kahoun the last month. Right? Like, once Bodie decided to come back a month later for the blue gold game, you're like, okay, they're going to get
less than 30 days later. Yeah.
Right. They're going to get this guy on his own dime, unofficial, but you're going to get this guy. Yeah. Davis Andrews, I think they're in a good place, but I'm not going to, if I had to put my mortgage on the line right now, I wouldn't do that with Davis Andrews. I wouldn't do that with any safeties. And that's really where I started to get a little bit concerned, Ryan, is I feel like they got to talk themselves into some of these things are going to be okay. And everybody talks about Al Washington and Al Golden as recruiters, but there's nobody to me that has more to prove on the recruiting trail right now than Chris O'Leary.
It's true.
I mean, it's not even close, in my opinion. He's had 2 recruiting classes. He completely struck out in one and did relatively well in the other, but he wasn't the primary driving force behind Ben Minich. That was Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman. I mean, Don Schuler, O'Leary's a role there, but Marcus Freeman has had as big of a role as anybody in why Don Schuler picked. I mean, you've talked to, that family very well.
Yep.
They didn't pick Notre Dame because of Chris O'Leary. They picked Notre Dame because of Marcus Freeman. If we're talking about people, now there's other reasons. It's a very smart family, like a family that very focused on the academics, the degree, the network. I mean, it's a very savvy family.
But Marcus Freeman being a role model is big for that family.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was as a human being, that was the driving force behind him coming to Notre Dame from a person standpoint. It wasn't Chris O'Leary. Now, I think Chris O'Leary is a really good football coach, but you cannot afford at a skill position at Notre Dame to only be a good coach and not a good recruiter.
Sure.
Or only a good recruiter and not a good coach. You got to do both. And that's why I say if Chris O'Leary doesn't show something here in the next few months, it's problematic. It's very problematic. And that's probably the position I'm most concerned about when I look at how this class is going to finish as a position group. Ryan, is that fair to say at this point in time?
Yeah. Because I mean you're in a situation where your roster is limited on numbers, limited on proven impact coming back, and you don't have a lot of clear answers. Like I think we both like Kenny Urlacher as a football player, but I don't envision Kenny Urlacher being a kid that comes in 2024 and he's just like an instant answer. Like I don't necessarily see that. I don't.
Yeah, he's like a top 250 type of a guy I like. Not player, that guy pans out, he's the next Kyle Hamilton. He's more Jalen Elliott than he'll be Kyle Hamilton or Harrison Smith as a football player. And that's okay. I mean, Jalen Elliott was part of one of the best secondaries in college football.
You need Jalen Elliott's, man. You need those types of kids. You do.
Right.
I think that for me, again, the hesitations comes with you just need results at some point, man. Somebody said in the chat earlier, Brian, it's not wrong. It's like I thought Kyle Hamilton being the 14th overall pick and being an All-American at Notre Dame at safety would be like a springboard to safety recruiting, right? Like that should be a big momentum build, and it hasn't happened for whatever reason. And in this 2024 class, how easy of a sell is it to me to go into a couch? And again, it's not this easy, folks. So like, I'm not trying to like parlay this into like complete shade, but if I go into DeJuan Lane's room, for instance, right, with his parents, I'm like, DeJuan, you would have a chance if you come in and you do everything right to potentially play as a freshman. You know why? Because we lack depth at this position, and we lack bodies for one, and we lack impact depth. We lack that right now. It's an easy pitch, I believe. And you could also say, hey, we had just 2 years ago an All-American safety that went 14th overall. It was the highest graded rookie of any safety in the Pro Football Focus era. That's what we've done, right? We've developed some good football players at safety, and you're really talented, so you can come in and you can play early. For whatever reason, that really hasn't hit for a lot of kids this cycle, man. Like it hasn't. I mean, it's just you're missing that right now. You're missing that. There was just been a lot of hiccups even in 2024. It's like DeMello Jones was interested in Notre Dame, Brian. They couldn't get DeMello Jones to take a visit. Like you couldn't get him. How long did it take for Jalen McClain to set up an official visit? How long did it take to get DeJuan Lane to?
And there's still not a lot of optimism that Jalen McClain is going to pick Notre Dame. Yeah. And he's the guy that should be very pro Notre Dame for certain. And I don't completely blame them for that, but to a degree you kind of do. Right. And like DeJuan Lane, like I don't know that Chris O'Leary is driving the bus on Notre Dame being back with DeJuan Lane either. And so it gets a little concerning to me. It does. Yeah. And again, I think very highly of Chris O'Leary as a coach. I do. And part of it is he is still new at this. He's only been a full-time coach for 2 years, but you got to figure it out, buddy. This is Notre Dame, right? You got to figure it out and you got to get it done. You got to figure out, why am I not connecting to these kids?
Right.
And then figure out how to do it. And Marcus Freeman's going to have to realize, hey, there's certain positions I got to step up in more. Dealin doesn't need my help as much as Chris O'Leary does, right? Chancey doesn't need my help as much as Chris O'Leary does. Because the one thing that the offensive coaches have is an offensive coordinator that's a dynamic recruiter, right? Personality-wise and things like that. Gino's got a lot of charisma. The
Yes,
defensive staff, outside of Mike Mickens, who's the guy that's the dynamic personality that, not Al Golden. He's not doing that. He's not jumping in and helping you seal the deal with these kids. He's not. So Marcus Freeman is going to have to sort of take back control of the defensive recruiting, in my opinion, in a big way. And I'm not seeing that right now, Ryan. I mean, we hear kids talk about him, but kids that they should be getting. Bodie Kahouns. I'm hearing it, but we're not hearing a kid that we don't think that they're going to get all of a sudden coming to Notre Dame the way that Jalen Sneed did, the way that Josh Burnham did. Josh Burnham went from everybody thought he was going to go to Michigan to Notre Dame for one reason: Marcus Freeman. Tyson Ford committed Notre Dame over Oklahoma for one reason: Marcus Freeman. And we saw that impact last year's class as well. But that's because when Marcus Freeman started recruiting Adon Schuler and those guys, he was still the defensive coordinator. Adon committed to Notre Dame when Marcus Freeman was still the defensive coordinator. So did Drake Bowen. So did Keon Keeley. So did Brennan Vernon. So did a lot of those guys. And so, he's gonna have to start getting back more involved with that side of the ball. Help the offensive staff as they request it. But you've got to take back charge of defensive recruiting. That's got to be your top priority, because offensively, Ryan, and I've always believed you can scheme your way into some level. You need talent on offense to win. You're not out there like Georgia's had great scheme the last 2 years. They weren't thrown to a bunch of bums.
Sure. Now,
scheme can help make a guy like Ladd McConkey a much better player than his skill set would otherwise determine, correct? But Adonai Mitchell's a dude. I mean, Jermaine Burton's an athletic guy. Brock Bowers is a stud. They've had really talented running backs. They've had really talented offensive linemen. They're not out there winning with a bunch of okay guys. They don't have 11 mediocre football players that they're winning games with, right? You have to have talent on offense, but you can scheme it beyond maybe its natural talent level. You can't win championships if your defense is just subpar talent-wise. Yep. And so I'm not saying it is or it's on the way there. I think they've recruited the defense extremely well since Marcus Freeman arrived, but he's got to make sure that doesn't fall back now that he's the head coach. That's the point. Because this is the first class, Ryan, that's being put together without him having an influence on it as the defensive coordinator. Because you cannot ignore the fact that a lot of last year's top players started being recruited by Notre Dame heavily or committed when he was still the defensive coordinator. And then a lot of those relationships that he started as defensive coordinator with the Christian Grays carried over when he became the head coach, but it was already that established relationship.
Sure.
And they were able to seal the deal with that. That's not the case now. And they're going to have to get to the point where he's going to have to say, I can't allow this to fall off. Because right now, depending how they finish, there is that fear. But at the same time, you also have to counter that with, I don't know how good this class could be compared to past classes, because I just don't think it's a great year nationally at most defensive positions. Those two things have to be weighted together when you start talking about how good of a job is the staff really doing. Well, we won't know till they finish. But when you look at that finish, you have to say, okay, what can we say they didn't do a good enough job if certain things happen? And then what can we say is, I'm not sure how much better it could have been because of the type of year it was. And that's kind of how I look at it. Like if they get Kingston, I'm like, I don't know if this could have been that much better of a linebacker class, just based on how it is recruiting wise. If they get Logan Thomas and Justin Scott, I got no complaints.
No.
You get Caleb Beasley, I'm thrilled with corner. I'm okay with corner recruiting now because it's a good year, but you're taking a flyer. You've had 2 good years in a row. It's hard to sell cornerback at Notre Dame, period. And now you're telling kids they got to play behind Benjamin Morrison and Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey and all those guys. It's going to be a tough sell, but you did it with Leonard Moore, who I think is a really good football player. You're taking a flyer on Karson Hobbs, and they don't think it's a flyer. I do. That's me talking. Notre Dame does not view him as a flyer. They like him a lot. So, it just, the finish is going to be key, Ryan, because we could be talking about a big-time top 5. This class could be one of the 5 best in the country on defense. It could. Yep. You give me Logan Thomas, you give me Justin Scott, you give me Kingston Viliama Asa, you give me Caleb Beasley, you give me DeJuan Lane, and you give me Davis Andrews. You're not going to find many better defensive classes in the country. You're just not, in my opinion, Ryan. You're not. But I can't promise you that they're going to get all those guys, even half those guys, and that's going to be the key.
Well, I mean, because when you look at it, the class is filling up quickly on the defensive side of the ball, and just in general, you're up to 16 commits now in the class overall, and the players that are getting filled up, especially on defense, for me right now, Brian, are like the second thirds of a group, right? Like the second best guy that you want in a class, the third best guy in your class. You still have a bunch of headliners that are out there, which tells you the margin for error is starting to get smaller and smaller. The board is getting smaller and smaller. You always say you have to hit the inside straight, right? And there's going to be a couple spots that you have to hit the inside straight in because there's just not a lot of options that are left on the board. I mean, we're going to blink our eyes and this class is going to be complete over the next few months. It's going to be. I don't envision this one dragging on incredibly long. You know, a couple players, maybe perhaps, but you're going to be in a situation here with Notre Dame. If you miss on just one or two of that group, you're a little bit of trouble, man. You're a little bit of trouble. You might have to reevaluate things. You might have to expand boards. You might have to figure a different situation out. Like that is where you are. All the guys that you just mentioned, why could it be a great class? Because you just mentioned some dudes, man, some like top 100, 5-star caliber players in the case of Justin Scott. And so you are in a situation where you have a low margin for error attacking some of the best football players in the country. You've gotten some really good players in this class already on the defensive side of the ball, but it really doesn't fill out the way you want unless Owen Wafle is the second defensive tackle of the class behind Justin Scott, right? Or you have Elijah Rushing and Bryce Young and Cole Mullins, and then that's where the depth comes Thomas, in, and that's where the impact comes. Like that's where that conversation changes really quickly. And right now, the conversation's a little bleak. I mean, I don't want to say bleak, but there's question marks behind it.
Yeah, it's definitely not bleak. It's definitely not bleak to me because again, I like if you were to say, okay, I'm nervous about Justin Scott, but then say, well, where's he going to go? So I don't know. That's the difference. Like when Keon started looking around, there was one school that just scared the crap out of me, and it was Alabama. They were the only one that's going to be able to flip them. I don't feel that like, oh, Miami. That's not Miami is not my concern right now. That doesn't mean he may not end up there with Justin Scott. But the point is, I'm not nervous because of the Miami stuff. I'm not nervous about that at all. I'm nervous about the fact that he's saying one thing and that's fine. And I believe it. But then it's like, but I just need to see him get back on campus to feel better about what he's saying. Right. And that's kind of where I'm at. But like, it's going to come down to Justin Scott, to me, Logan Thomas, Kingston Viliama Asa, Caleb Beasley, Davis Andrews, and DeJuan Lane. To me, that's where it's at. If your finish is there, this is a really good top 10, borderline top 5 defensive class, in my opinion. It's an outstanding defensive line class. It's a really good linebacker class, but again, I don't know if there was an elite linebacker class to be had. It's an excellent corner class because if you give me Leonard Moore and Caleb Beasley as my 1 and 2, and then Karson Hobbs is my 3, I'm thrilled with that. And then you give me Kennedy Urlacher to go with Davis Andrews and DeJuan Lane, who I have look, and I know Davis Andrews is a guy that not as many people here are fired up about, I don't think. But for me, that's a borderline top 100 kid to me. Like that's a really good football player. Same with DeJuan Lane. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm really feeling good about the class now. And that's where I'm at. And I'm not throwing in there Elijah or Malachi Williams and Elijah Rushing. I get that those are the big names, but if you give me Logan Thomas, Cole Mullins, Bryce Young, Justin Scott, and Owen Wafle, that is a darn good defensive line class. I'm not going to get into the dream of adding a 6th guy in Malachi or Elijah. I'm just trying to be fair. I'm just realistically, that's would be the finish. It's a finish that they certainly can have.
Yeah.
And it would be an outstanding class because I'm part of it too is what's your evaluation of the current players? And this is where I think a lot of people to me are a little off in their being how down there on the class. There's legit reasons to be concerned about the direction of the defensive class. And we just aired all of them. I think part of the reason I can't go as far as some people are going, Ryan, is because I have a very big difference of opinion on certain players in the class. And especially up front. Owen Wafle and Cole Mullins, to me, are really big-time pickups for me. And you were on the Owen Wafle train from day one on that one. It took me a while to get there. and after his junior year, but you saw that potential off sophomore film. You just said, hey, the skills are there. He just has to put it together. And he did as a junior, put it together. Because I would say to you, this is how our conversations go. Like, yeah, I see what you're saying, man, but it's a little undersized. I'm not sure if he can play inside. And the production concerned me. You're like, yeah, production's legit, but this is what you'd see. And so, okay, well, let's see what he does as a junior. And then he comes out and the production skyrockets. He's bigger, he's more, and he takes that jump. And so I'm on board. I'm sold. Cole Mullins, I'm extremely high on Cole Mullins. So I think that's kind of a baseline. I like Teddy Rizak more than a lot of people do. So I get that one. I like Kennedy Urlacher more than some. I'm very high on Leonard Moore. So there are other guys I'm not as high on, to be completely honest with you. I don't have Bryce Young ranked as high as some other of the services do, although I love the upside. I'm not as high on Karson Hobbs as some people are, but I hope I'm wrong because I love that kid. So I just feel like, to me, you've got a really good corner in this class. You've got 2 really good defensive linemen already in this class, and you've got a really high upside defensive lineman in this class to go with them. If you finish strong, this still has a chance to be an outstanding class, defensive class, to go with what is the makings of a excellent offensive class. So I think the concern is enough to where we had to kind of do this show. But the positive is that there are guys on the board that Notre Dame, and I would say this, of the guys that I mentioned that are keys to the finish, and that is Logan Thomas, Justin Scott, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Davis Andrews, DeJuan Lane, Caleb Beasley. I would say at the very worst, Ryan, Notre Dame's in the top 2 with all those kids. The only one that you can maybe debate that with is DeJuan Lane, to me. Maybe. But there, the debate is, okay, then he's top 3.
Right.
But Caleb Beasley's either going to go to Tennessee or Notre Dame. That's it. That's the options.
I think so too. Yeah.
Logan Thomas, I think they're the leader for. Davis Andrews, I do think they're the leader for Davis Andrews, Ryan, but it's not a definite like it is with some other guys, right?
Sure.
Justin Scott, I think they're in the top. I would even be willing to say right now, if I had to say who's Justin Scott's leader, I honestly probably right now would say Notre Dame.
Would too. Yeah.
I just don't know if it's going to be that way after more and more and more visits and not getting back to Notre Dame. I would say that they're the leader right now for Kingston by about a half an inch. So the close is going to be the key, right? And if you were to argue with me, well, I think Ohio State's a leader, I'd say, okay, I'm not going to argue with you about that. I think Ohio State, you think Ohio State, I think Notre Dame, we would both agree whoever's leading it's by that much, and the June visits are going to have a huge part in who ultimately wins that battle.
Okay.
And, so it's not a dream or a pipe dream to say they finish with all those kids. It's not at all. But they got to finish. They got to close. The good news is last June, Ryan, they crushed it. Like all the guys that were, man, they better really do well here in order to get that kid. They did. They crushed it last
Great
year.
Houses of the world, the Jaden Osbury's, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Guys that were like, we felt Jaden Osbury, they were the leader for Jaden Osbury, but it was a little tenuous. Some people thought A&M, some people thought Michigan, but the visit, he crushed it. I mean, he just had no chance after that. And so I do think that you're in a situation now, Ryan, where they're going to have to repeat what they did a year ago. And that's the thing is they've done really well when they get these kids on campus, very well. And that's kind of where you kind of come down in is when they get these kids on campus, they by and large close the deal on the guys that they want. Right now, you're gonna have to do that again, and that's going to be the key. Christian Gray also is another one. When did Christian commit? Do you remember when Christian Gray committed to Notre Dame? It was before the summer visits.
July.
Correct?
It was July.
So the visits did seal the deal, right?
Yeah, he was July 4th, right? I think
that's right. You're correct.
Yeah.
He was part of that 5 players in 5 days thing. Now they didn't close with everybody because they didn't close with Ronan Hannafin.
Yep.
So I mean, there were some guys that they didn't close the deal on, but most of them they did, and they're going to have to repeat that again this year. They didn't close the deal with like Caleb Downs, but that visit put them in the game more so, even more for Caleb Downs. So it was still a needle moving visit. It just wasn't enough to seal it at the end. And they're going to have to do that again in June, Ryan, because all these kids we talked about, except for Justin Scott, are going to be on campus here in less than in the next month.
Yep.
And so they're going to have to close. But there's a chance for it to be really good. Just going to have to knock it out of the park here over the next month. And
it does seem like a lot of kids, even more than last year, are they want to have a decision made before senior year. It feels like a lot of kids on the board are in that boat more than not. And last year, because you remember, like at this time last year, Brian, Jaden Greathouse was talking about maybe taking it into the season. Jeremiah
he was pretty
Love
adamant about that actually.
Season.
Ryan, if I remember correctly, Jaden Osbury was as well. I believe was adamant about taking it into the season.
Osbury, Jeremiah Love, there were a bunch of guys last year that were like, I'm not going to rush this type of situation. And then those visits change the equation a lot for a lot of kids mostly in a good way. But to your point, it's a bad way sometimes. There's always the horror stories of some visits, but Notre Dame historically does a really good job when they get players on campus, especially during the Marcus Freeman era in this recency. So you have to feel good about having that opportunity in front of you. But again, the closer we get to the season, you're running out of time now, right? Like you have to strike now for a lot of these kids, or you're not going to be able to strike at all. So big June is going to be massive for Notre Dame in 2024. Absolutely massive.
So that wraps up this part of the segment, Ryan. We're going to go to a mailbag next, but before we hit that mailbag, do us a favor, folks. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you have not done so, you're listening on the YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe to our podcast platform for Irish Breakdown and CFP Nation. And if you're listening via podcast platform, please do us a favor and give us a 5-star review. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Let's move over to the mailbag, Ryan, and I'm going to start off right here with Archer 452.
Archer said, Notre Dame was the number one in the recruiting rankings last summer and finished 13th in 247 rankings. They are currently third. Where do you think they finish this year?
I don't care. I really don't. I don't care what anybody says. If you're going to try and tell me that there were 12 classes better than Notre Dame's last year, I'm going to tell you you're on drugs. Or you don't know what you're talking about. There were not 12 classes better than Notre Dame's next year. And so I don't really care where it finishes. I really don't. You would be hard-pressed for me to say they should be outside the top 7 last year. And that's trying to be as kind as possible, right? And objective as possible. There were not 12 classes better than Notre Dame's next year. So I really don't care where 247 has them or I don't even know how On3 does their rankings or honestly where Rivals has them. I really don't. I care about, do I look at that class and say, that's a really good class? And everybody keeps trying to compare Notre Dame to Alabama. And I'm telling y'all, that's not how Notre Dame is going to win. They're going to win a much more like Clemson did, where what did Clemson do? They mixed in some high-level players that were highly ranked with guys that weren't. You look at that offense. They landed a big-time quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. Justin Ross was pretty highly ranked. T. Higgins was pretty highly ranked. You know who was not highly ranked? Travis Etienne and almost their entire offensive line.
Yeah.
Right? You look at their defense. Dexter Lawrence, high-ranked recruit. Some of their other guys were highly ranked recruits. You know who was not a very highly ranked recruit? Isaiah Simmons.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Isaiah Simmons was not a very highly ranked recruit. I think Clellan Farrell was wasn't he a military school guy? Like he had to go to
not sure.
No, he was a private school kid actually. Rivals had him outside the top 100. Right, he's a good player, but obviously ended up being a lot better than people thought he would be. And so that's just kind of where they're going to have to be. Clemson had 0. I've said this before. Clemson had 0 top 5 classes leading into their 2 title teams. 0. The first time they had a top 5 class was after the second title. And that top 5 class has not won and has not done a thing yet. And so that's who they're going to have to be. It's about the talent, the balance, meeting your needs, and then combining the high-level talent that you know of, which they did last year with the Charles Jagasaws, the Drake Bowens, the Christian Grays, the Jaden Osburys. Did I say Jaden Greathouse? I know.
No, you didn't.
He was one. Braylon James. Like there was those high-level guys like that we just knew had ability. But then they also went out and got the lower floor height, the Armel Mukums, the Brandon Hillmans, and it didn't work out, but they ended up, but they got them. The Boubacar Traore's, the guys like that you're like, this guy may not be there right now, but the tools are there for him to eventually become a big-time player. And that's kind of when they first got in on Jeremiah Love, he wasn't considered a highly ranked recruit.
He was a 3-star by a couple platforms when they first got on him.
And so it's about finding the talent and then with the high ceilings and then figuring it out. That's really what it boils down to, Ryan. And that's, I mean, you know, that's where they have to get to. That's where Notre Dame has to get to. But I don't care. I really don't. And that's not meant to be flippant or disrespectful to you. I get where you're coming from, but I really don't care. You were correct. Actually, Rivals did not even have Jeremiah Love ranked. Like, they don't even think they gave him a grade. He then jumped into the top 100 after like he had a really good summer workout and a bunch of offers came in, but like they jumped him up because of the offers. And then of course
Notre Dame got on him pretty early, man. They got on Love pretty early.
They did. And then of course he commits to Notre Dame and he's ranked 52nd, then drops 70 spots after he commits to Notre Dame. Which I'm
sure.
Yeah.
And then he has a dynamic senior year and no one cares, apparently. So, sure.
Well, yeah, it was funny because he committed Notre Dame in October, and then they ranked him 59th on their December 6th updates.
Yeah.
And then for some reason, when they did their updates again a month and a half later, after 0 football was played, he dropped to 129, 70 spots. So sure.
Yeah.
You know, after he rushes for 300 yards in the state championship game and all that kind of stuff. Sure. So that's why I don't care about the rankings, man. I've told, especially now 247. 247, I care very little now. I used to respect 247's rankings. I don't anymore. And because I know the person in charge of that, and I just hard pass for me. But they got to finish well, right? Like they're ranked number 3 with 247. They're ranked number 2 with Rivals. Part of that's because they just have more guys than other people.
Some people, yeah.
You know, like they rank ahead of Georgia because they have more players than Georgia. Georgia has a much higher
per player, whatever.
Much higher per player thing, yeah. Much higher per player average than Notre Dame. Right now, Notre Dame's 40-some points ahead of Georgia, but that's because they have 16 recruit commits and Georgia has 12. You know, Notre Dame is ahead of Ohio State by 162 points. That's because they have 3 more commits than Notre Dame. If you think about it, it doesn't require Ohio State to get a bunch of 5-stars to pass them. The one school that's in the top group that Notre Dame actually still do have a higher per player average than LSU, who's number 5, and a higher per player average than Penn State, number 6. So they're not only successful because of the number, but that factors into it. I mean, that definitely factors into it. And how many commits does Alabama have right now? Like 6?
They have, it's a low number.
They'll jump up.
Yes.
You know, they'll obviously jump up. But at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't matter a whole lot to me. It really doesn't. All right, let's get to some more here, Ryan.
Ant VR says, in your opinion, was the Bodie Kahoun commitment expected this soon, or was it a pushed up due to the class filling up and limited linebacker spots being available? I mean, Ant, we talked about this. We expected this. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. We expected that this was going to happen this week. We just didn't know that it was going to happen, first thing Monday morning at 7:00 in the morning. Like, we just weren't sure about that part, but we expected it because, as Brian talked a lot about earlier in the podcast, Bodie Kahoun is a guy that Notre Dame really likes a lot and has liked for a long time. So yeah, they were good with taking the commitment, obviously, anytime that he wanted to make it. Now that you are sitting, Notre Dame was up to 15 commits, obviously, with Teddy Rizak on Friday. So the class is starting to fill up a little bit. I'm not saying that's why, the whole reason that Bodie was like, I got to do this now. But I think that there was a little bit of like, hey, man, like, we're starting to fill up. Let's make this happen type of situation, especially if you're ready. Bodie was ready, and Notre Dame was always ready to take his commitments at the end of the day. He was a player that Notre Dame wanted in the class, and they got their guy in Bodie Kahoun. Right or wrong, debate or not debates, that is a fact that we are working with here, is that they always wanted Bodie Kahoun in this class. There was never a doubt about that.
Yeah, Ryan, I do think that Teddy Rizak committing probably had a little bit to do with the timing. But before we even knew who Teddy Rizak was, you had reported that Bodie had already begun the process of thinking about moving things up.
Yes.
There just was no need at the time because Notre Dame had 0 commitments a linebacker and knew they were taking 3.
Yep.
right? But so again, I don't know for a fact that he could have still changed his mind and done what he did. To me, again, I've tried to do this I've been doing this a long time. And you say, kid that wants to be here, this is what you see from kids who really want to be at a place.
Yes.
When the class starts filling up, say, okay, I know I wanted to do visits and all that, but I also know where I'm going. And I want to make sure that I have my spot reserved.
Yep.
And there's a couple players in this 2024 class that will not end up at Notre Dame, that are not going to end up at Notre Dame, even though they wanted to be at Notre Dame, but because they thought it was more important for them to kind of go on all the visits, and they lost their spot. Now, I'm not faulting those kids at all, because you needed to do what you needed to do. If you're not comfortable and ready to commit, then don't commit. I'm totally on board with that. But that's a fact, Ryan. I mean, they're just kids who are going to end up missing this, and this happens everywhere. But Notre Dame's turned down some players that would probably get people more excited than some of the guys they've gotten to take the guys they're getting. So I think the question is, do you trust their evaluation or not? And if you do, then you're going to like what you see. If you don't, then you're going to be a little bummed. And I think that's fair. And we should always be able to have those conversations. What bothered me in the discussion today was not that there were some people that had questions about Bodie Kahoun. I had questions about Bodie Kahoun when I first saw his film, Ryan. You know that. I wasn't in love with him the first time I saw him. But over time, you start to get more context. You see the lacrosse film. You see the sophomore film. You learn more about him as a player. And you start to say, okay, I see some things now that I really like. But I'm okay with people being up. But it's some of the silliness that you start, how's he any different than Drew White? Really? Like, I can name you
2.5 inches.
Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame, so you're the next JD Bertrand. Well, they're not saying he's the same kind of player. They're talking about the type of play, the type of role he's going to have at Notre Dame. Not so much. JD started at Will and Mike for Notre Dame. That's kind of what they're talking about. It's
all my fault for reporting that. That's what they told
well, you
them.
shouldn't have to, I mean, I get what you're saying, but you shouldn't have to worry about that. People should be able to kind of understand those type of things. But some of the stuff about, he's a reach, or they're reacting to this, those are all false. If you want to have a conversation with us about, is this a guy that is Notre Dame caliber? That's always a fair conversation. Always. And I'll never ever tell you to just trust the staff. I'll say, hey, look, this is what they think, and this is where they're coming from and all that. But I'll never say, well, you're wrong for not just believing the staff is always right. That'll never come out of my mouth. I'll explain to you what they think, but it'll never come out of my mouth. And this kind of goes into this next question, Ryan, from Nathan Milton, that I kind of want to address this along with it as well.
And Milton says, do you have a higher level of confidence in the type of projection players Coach Marcus Freeman gets during BK era? If so, why?
I can't really say that I know the answer to that question, because we haven't seen many of Marcus Freeman's players play. The reason that, for example, that I would tend to say yes, if I had to say it, is because of, I look at what he built at Cincinnati on defense, and I say this guy can clearly identify talented players. But you talk to the coaches at Notre Dame that were Cincinnati, they'll say, we didn't think Sauce Gardner was going to come to Notre Dame to be a top 5 overall, or Cincinnati be a top 5 overall pick. But we thought he was going to be pretty good for that level. But they saw a lot of that. They saw that in Kobe Bryant. They saw that in James Wiggins. They saw that in all those kids that ended up. I mean, they've had more. Marcus Freeman's had more guys drafted off of his Cincinnati defense than Notre Dame has had off their defense, I believe, in the last 3 years. That's correct.
Makes
right?
sense.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Certainly had more high-level draft picks taken. And so, like, certain coaches, I do believe, like Mike Mickens, but it's not based off what he's done at Notre Dame as much as what he's done at other places. If he only produced Benjamin Morrison, I'd say, well, yeah, I thought Benjamin Morrison was a dude too. So, I mean, how much credit am I going to give the guy? But it's Nick Johnson, it's Kobe Bryant, it's Sauce Gardner, and then what he's done as a coach. And that's to the point you made earlier, Ryan. Part of the reason I trust Mike Mickens' evaluations is because I also trust him as a coach, that he's going to develop these kids and get the most out of them.
Right.
And not all the coaches are that way. But the reason that I would say ultimately why I have more confidence, and I'm going to be as open about this as I can. Actually, I'm just going to be open about this. Part of the reason is because of my evaluations tend to fit more with what they're looking for. Now, at the end of the day, that's what it's got to come down to for us. It can't come down to, I like this guy more. Somebody said earlier, well, you're just saying this because you didn't like Brian Kelly. That's so childish. Just stop. My issues with Brian Kelly's recruiting were because I'd pop in the film and say, I don't see it. I'm a freaking Notre Dame fan. Do you think I would have cared if Brian Kelly won a title at Notre Dame or not? No, I would have been thrilled because I'm a Notre Dame fan. But when I pop in the film and I say, I don't see it, that's a reach. Sometimes I'm right. Sometimes I'm wrong. I think I'm right much more often than I'm wrong. But it was a disagreement in the players. There were times where I would defend guys during the Kelly era that they would sign. Joe Alt, everybody said I hated Jeff Quinn and hated Brian Kelly. Go back and listen to what I said about Joe Alt when they got Joe Alt. Thrilled about it. Loved the upside. Because it's not about whether I like somebody or not. I have to trust my instincts and my eye, Ryan. I think you tweeted about something like that today, right?
Yep.
And if you were to come to me and I would give you 2 seconds of hey, Brian, that's what I think. And I say, no, I think you're wrong. I like to say, okay, cool. I don't like that guy anymore. Hey, Ryan, you need to find something else to do.
Right.
Now, I would want you to be open to what I'm telling you and take into consideration and say, hey, you know what? Driscoll, your Lex, let me go back and look at him, which I know you've done. And I do the same thing with you because you have to trust other people's analysis. At the end of the day, my opinion about why I like the players that Marcus Freeman is bringing in is because when I pop in the film, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I see. That's what I see Clemson getting. I see Clemson getting a bunch of long, athletic, power defensive linemen. They recruited them for years, and eventually they got the right coaching in there, and those guys were dominant. Now, they got some 5 stars too, no doubt, but Notre Dame's got some highly ranked guys in this conversation as well. But it's about a brand of recruit that I want. I want the long, athletic dudes. Give me the ceilings over the floors if I have to choose one or the other. Almost every time. Almost. And that's what I see. I loved Drew White as a football player coming out of college, high school. Did you ever watch him play? I remember watching him play against, I think it was Bishop Gorman on national TV. He had like 17 tackles.
He went to
all over the field.
He was at
St. Thomas Aquinas.
St. Thomas Aquinas, yeah.
Yeah. So they played in one of those national games, and he had like 17 tackles. But you always knew that Drew was going to be a little bit limited because of the size. The funny thing is people say he wasn't very athletic. Drew White was very athletic, even with the injuries he had. He still ran a very good
6'7".
And that's a guy that had multiple lower body injuries. He was very athletic. The thing was, if you're going to be that size, you have to be. If I remember correctly, his 40 time, I believe, was better than Nakobe Dean's, wasn't it?
Did Nakobe Dean end up running? I feel like he didn't run.
I thought he did at the pro day, but let me look that up. So those are just some of the different things that I look for, Ryan. And I say, look, you need to find certain traits. I look for certain traits. Yeah, he ran a 4.74. Nakobe Dean ran a 4.74 is what he ran. And he ran a, shuttle. He ran a 4.32 shuttle. Drew White ran a 4.2 flat shuttle. And Drew White also ran a 6.9 3-cone, which is excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. So, but what was he? He was short and not long.
Yeah.
So you can see that and say, hey, there's a lot to like. What I like is that this staff tends to take chances on traits. Physical traits, not the Brian Kelly traits of, oh, he's a great kid. I'm talking physical traits. If I'm going to miss, I'm going to miss on a 6'5" guy with vines.
Yeah. That's
what I'm going to miss on. I'm going to miss on Boubacar Traore every day of the week, as opposed to, I don't want to say a name, a guy that's 6'2", 255, but plays with a great motor and has tons of heart. Every time. And that's why I tend to go with this staff, Ryan. That's my stance on why I tend to give this staff a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, is not so much because of anything they've done. It's just that my eyes tell me that their evaluation of this kid is correct, but not always. I mean, there's a couple kids, and I won't say who they are because that would go very bad, but there's a couple kids that you and I are extremely high on that I don't think they're as high on. Yeah. So this isn't an across the board, everything, we're always on the same page, but more often than not, when they see a kid when there's something that they see, I see it too, and that's what I trust. Whereas with Brian Kelly's staff, I'd have to like talk myself into why this makes sense, or they try to talk me into why it makes sense.
When I evaluate players, I feel like my bias is always, I always trend towards the upside of players, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that if you have the people in place, you can get the most out of the talent that's in the room. So I have a very, I'd say I have hesitation on this one, Brian, and Nathan, to your question. At certain positions, yes, I have more confidence in this staff than Brian Kelly's staff. But I can't say that I'm fully confident every single position coach level that they're going to get the most out of each and every group that they're signing, right? Like I'm starting to see a lot. I'm hear a lot better things about Coach Washington, for instance, right? So can Coach Washington get the most out of the 2023 class? I'm starting to think he possibly can, and I sure hope he can. But I can't say definitively right now that I have more confidence that he can get more than Mike Elston did at Notre Dame as far as for the talent that he had in the room. Like, I can't say that, but there are other positions, like obviously wide receiver. I have much more confidence that Chancey Stuckey is going to get the most out of his wide receivers than what Del Alexander did, for instance, right? So I really think that this is very dependent on what coach is there, because I am generally a fan of add impact talents as far as upside, and let your coaches do their jobs as developers. I'm big on that. Because let's be honest, even some of the guys that we always talk about as high floor type of players, they've missed sometimes too, man. Like, they're not foregone conclusions to being good college players. So I do respect the people that take chances in recruiting. I do respect that sometimes. You have to balance it, but I do respect the thought process. But I can't sit here and definitively say, yes, I trust the staff as a whole entirely more. I trust Marcus Freeman more than the previous head coach. I do that. I trust wide receiver coach more than I did the previous staff. Mike Mickens is the same. So, yes, I trust him wholeheartedly. There are some positions that I definitely trust more, but I can't definitively say, like, yes, this entire staff, I trust more than the last staff. There's some nuance to that conversation, in my opinion.
All right, Ryan, let's get to, we have a couple super chats down here I want to get to here from start with DJ Holman.
DJ Holman says, Karson. How many defensive accolades has LeBron James gotten? LBJ has only passed Michael Jordan in one thing that matters: finals losses. Jordan is the GOAT, could win by himself.
I mean, no, he couldn't.
No one could win by themselves.
I mean, look, DJ, I was with you until the last part, right? Like, first of all, I don't think Jordan's the GOAT. I don't think that you can define a GOAT, because everything that they tell me you need to makes Jordan the GOAT, I can find in someone else. Look at Jordan's scoring. Okay, he didn't score like Wilt, right? I mean, you know, so if it's just about the scoring, okay, he didn't.
Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50 points a game one season, so without 3-pointers.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, so Jordan, great player, right? I mean, great player. But, you know, hey, look, there's other guys that scored more than him. You know, so I think him and Wilt, I think, averaged the same amount of points, and that was in an era where, I mean, Wilt had zero 3-pointers. Jordan at least played in a 3-point era.
Yeah.
But, you know, okay, that's not really where I can't go there with you. I mean, Oscar Robinson averaged a triple-double for an entire season one time. Jordan's never done that. I mean, so you can't go by, so, it's about championships. Okay, well, then Bill Russell's the greatest of all time because he's got 11.
10. What do you want? He won like 11. 10 in 11 years, right?
He won 11, like, yeah. I mean, and one is a player coach.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you know, so, and here's the deal. You want to know why you can't do it all by yourself? Go look at Michael Jordan's record before Larry Bird, like, kind of broke down and sort of retired. Jordan never beat Larry Bird in the playoffs, ever. I think remember the year that he scored before your time run, he scored like 69 points in the game and they lost to the Celtics because you can't do it all by yourself.
It's wild, man.
And this isn't an insult. Jordan doesn't win a title or 6 titles if they don't get Pippen and Horace Grant and a lot of those guys, and then the second round, Dennis Rodman. And that's not to take anything away from Michael Jordan. It's the same argument I used for John Elway. Well, of course he won when you finally put a team around him because he's the GOAT, you know, so to speak, you know, or the best, one of the best quarterbacks ever play. You finally give him a real team and he dominates. Well, that's what happened with Jordan. He finally got a team that Like the Piston teams that used to beat Jordan, it's because it was him against an entire team. It wasn't until they had more help, he got more help that he became, and now he could then elevate that team. So I was with you till the end, but if I had to choose between LeBron James and Michael Jordan, there's no question who I'm taking. And could you imagine? And I know that a lot of old people say this and it drives young people nuts, but could you imagine the kind of points per game that Larry Bird, Michael Jordan would be scoring in today's era with the way they call fouls now?
Yeah.
Come on, man. You know, I mean, it's great because Jordan did all that and Bird did all that without three-pointers. I mean, Bird was a great three-point shooter. He just didn't shoot three-pointers a lot because it just wasn't part of the game back then. But you're telling me if Larry Bird didn't grow up in this era, he wouldn't shoot a million three-pointers and be phenomenal at it?
Oh, he would. Yeah.
Guy was 6'10", and he won 3 straight three-point shooting contests in a row. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it's ridiculous. But as far as the first part, man, I mean, it's a no-brainer. If it comes down to who am I picking to start my team, Michael Jordan or LeBron James, it's a no-brainer. I'm taking Michael Jordan. It's not even a conversation. I don't even know if LeBron would be the first small forward that I would take, to be completely honest with you. But, yeah, the last part's the only thing I disagree with you on, DJ, is you can't win all by yourself. And Jordan's results against the Celtics and Pistons pre them really building that team up are examples of that to me.
DJ, leave my boy Karson alone, though, man. We need to get back on the podcast.
The young bucks, though, man, they don't know. I mean, because like they just look at like JJ Redick's absurd comments about Larry Bird and the NBA in the '80s. He has no clue. He doesn't have any idea. No, he said basically the NBA today is more physical than it was in the '80s.
JJ Redick said that.
JJ, like literally half the Detroit Pistons team would have been suspended from the league.
Oh yeah, Bill Laimbeer would have been suspended 6 times from the.
I mean, he borderline arrested.
Yes.
He was the dirtiest player I've ever seen. Like the biggest scumbag. I'm sorry, Notre Dame fans. I know he's a Notre Dame alum. Scumbag, biggest scumbag because he was trying to hurt people. That's the thing I hate about Bill. He was trying to hurt people, and so I despise that guy. But the Pistons now, I mean, the entire team except for Isaiah would foul out. Don't tell me it's today. Did you see like Gilbert Arenas always is going on these long, stupid tangents about why modern players are so much better than former? I'm just shut up, dude. Like so I don't want to be like one of those guys, those old head type of dudes. But look, you just look at the style of the game back then and compare it to now. If guys back then were playing now with the emphasis on 3-pointers and how they call fouls, like Larry Bird and Michael Jordan would be good for 15 a night just from the stripe. I mean, you know what I mean? Just from the stripe. And the other one I laugh at is like, well, Bird couldn't dominate in today's era because he's not athletic enough. I'm like, have you not seen Luka play? Larry Bird is a better athlete than Luka Doncic. And he dominates, you know. So
also
kind of funny.
Joel Embiid won the MVP this year, but Nikola Jokic won it 2 years in a row, and he is not a very good athlete at all.
No. How do Joel Embiid's team doing the playoffs? Oh, that's right, because it's me and James can't do it all by ourselves. Like
they cut that up, man. That's not what he was actually saying.
That's exactly what he said. I listened to the whole thing.
That conversation.
The whole thing. I listened to the whole thing. There was no more context to that. We can't win it all by ourselves. Everybody's got to play.
Man, he took the blame before.
No, he didn't. He took the blame. He took the blame after throwing the rest of his team under the bus.
Nah.
But yes, Michael Jordan would dominate today's era just like he dominated the 90s. And he would have done. And here's the difference too about Jordan in the 80s. There's a lot fewer teams, which means there are a lot of guys in the league today that would not be in the league in the 80s and 90s. Like people say, well, yeah, Bird won because they had a lot of super teams. Well, they had super teams because there were fewer teams. Right. So the talent was spread out amongst fewer teams. And so every team had multiple stars back then. I mean, look,
free agency wasn't as prevalent.
It wasn't as prevalent, exactly. Yeah. But it also, too, even if free agency was prevalent, you still had fewer teams. So no matter where the free agency was going, there was always going to be teams with 3-4 all-stars on it because there just was fewer guys in the league. And so, yeah, did you ever hear the story that I think it was Steven Jackson was telling it when he played for the Pacers? And he's like, Bird's like 60. And he's like, we're at practice one day and we're stretching. This one Bird was, this is after he was done coaching, but when he was
executive or whatever. Yeah.
He said he walks into practice one day and he's got like his slacks on or whatever, and they're stretching, and he just picks up a basketball and just starts. He said he dropped like 10, 15 in a row and just walked off the court. It's like, dude's 60. Don't tell me he couldn't have been a great 3-point shooter back then. But I've heard. Did you ever hear the story about Jordan, who was an exec one time, and I guess he got. I'm trying to remember how it went, but he got somebody that kind of tried to call him out, so he went and put gear on.
Oh yeah,
came in and like. Him and the second team beat the first team.
Yes, I have heard that one. Yeah,
those are my favorite stories.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back on track to some football stuff.
Next super chat is from Andrew Burke. Thank you so much for the super chat. Notre Dame goes 11-1 next year and loses in the semis in the college football playoff. Ohio State goes 10-2, losing to Notre Dame and Michigan, and fires Ryan Day. OSU offers Marcus Freeman as their head coach. What happens?
I think Marcus Freeman says thanks, but no thanks.
I hate these
hypotheticals. There's this notion that Marcus Freeman would just jump at the chance to go to Ohio State. Maybe someday. But you got to think about this practically. If Notre Dame goes 11-1 and goes to the college football playoff, Ohio State goes 10-2 and they fire their head coach, who a year prior was within 2 points of beating the defending champs and the eventual national champions, and has been a 10-plus game winner every year, and they fire him, why would I want to go there? Now, I would use their interest to get me more money for myself and my staff at Notre Dame, but what would be the appeal other than him being an alum? And I don't think that every alum just pines to go back to his alma mater no matter what. If Notre Dame went to the playoff this year, he'd be in a pretty good freaking situation at Notre Dame. Yeah. So I think this assumption that he would, and I'm not saying Andrew's saying that, I'm saying there are some people who do believe that would be the answer to Andrew's question. It's a very fair question. I think what happens in that situation is he stays at Notre Dame. I also don't think Ohio State's firing Ryan Day because he goes 10-2 and loses to Notre Dame and Michigan. That would be so absurd.
I'm not sure about
so
that
absurd.
One. I'm not
sure about
so
that absurd.
One. If he loses to Michigan for the third straight year, they might. I don't know, man.
But to me, it's like there's no evidence that Ohio State. Well, they did that to John Cooper. I've pointed this out before. John Cooper had 2 bad seasons before they fired him. It wasn't just because they lost because he lost a bunch to Michigan, but it wasn't until he had 2 bad seasons in a row that they fired him. So there's no evidence of that. I think sometimes we project onto decision makers the stupidity that we hear from fans. And because fans feel a certain way about things, that must mean what the school means. And no, I have a hard time believing that the administration would fire him after a 10-2 season. There's no evidence that Ohio State has that kind of administration. Now listen, Ryan, if it was left up to a fan vote to fire him or not, he's gone. It's gone. Sure. He's out of here. I just don't think Gene Smith is stupid. You may not like Gene Smith, but he's not stupid. He's a savvy guy, and I think he would know we're going to have a really hard time convincing a big-time coach to come here to replace a guy who's basically been in the playoffs almost every year he's been head coach. It's going to be tough. What they're going to do is they're going to think they're going to get Marcus Freeman in that situation, and they're going to end up with Luke Fickell is what would happen. So careful what you wish for, Buckeyes. Careful what you wish for.
Luke.
Yeah. We have a super sticker from Nathan Milton. Nathan, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's get to a couple more. Got this question right here from Corey Keene, right? I'm going to ask this one because it's more for you. What do you think? Corey Keene asks, what do you think this means for Chris Cole, referring to the Bodie Kahoun commitment? Do we shoot for 4 linebackers, or is it just Kingston, Viliama, Asa now? Go Irish. I'll say this real quick and set you up, Ryan. It's neither one of those options.
Yeah, well, I think that what we're looking at here, Corey, is that there's a hierarchy on the board here, right? Notre Dame is still going to recruit Chris Cole. They still very much like Chris Cole. Chris Cole is coming for an official visit in June. But I would say for me, Kingston is the clear top guy on the board. He's the guy that they want to end up in this class. So I think there's just a little bit of a hierarchy, but I don't think by any stretch that they're going to stop recruiting Chris Cole and put all their eggs in the basket, because we know that could burn you sometimes, right? So I think they will continue to recruit Chris Cole hard. They will see where things go, obviously, in June, because there is a situation where you don't end up with Kingston in the class. And if you don't end up with Kingston in the class, then you need to find another option there, right? And they like Chris Cole. they will continue to recruit Chris Cole, but I do not think they go to 4. I think 3 is the number as of right now. Things can always change, but that just seems to be the number for Notre Dame this cycle.
Yeah, I just I'll concur with what Ryan said. I don't see any scenario in which they go to 4. I don't. But when we say that Kingston's their top option, you guys realize they're not going to just only recruit him. This staff has shown now the previous staff would have done that. They would have pretty much dropped it and said, we're going to put all our eggs in this basket. This staff doesn't do that. People say, well, why are you still offering this guy? Well, is this kid committed yet? No. Okay, then. They're going to keep recruiting people till that guy commits. And that's kind of how they're going to do it. But, I don't see them going to 4. I think the only way they go to 4, Ryan, is if there's some sort of – it would be like down the road because there's like some sort of departure from the current roster, or some kid just blows up and has like a monster senior season. You're like, yeah, we can't pass on this kid.
Yeah.
But I just don't see a scenario in which they would do that, Ryan.
Yep. Now, as of right now, we have Rob Osgood with the next question. Says, I am excited to see the staff working hard. Do you think that June will be like last June when Notre Dame had a great month in commits? Love hard work paying off. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the question so much. So we hit on this a little bit earlier, but I do think that June could be a monumental month for Notre Dame in 2024 as it was in 2023. If you look back to just kind of the impact that the staff was able to have last year. And again, we're talking about, especially in that visit schedule and working, especially the next month and a half after the Blue Gold game last year. Talking about the impact they had with Jaden Ausberry, Jaden Greathouse, really moving the needle with some of those guys, right? Being able to close on a couple defensive players in that time as well. The Christian Grays, who obviously were, Ohio State was on them, LSU, USC was even a team that was, had Christian's attention for a little bit. I do think that you're going to get a lot of clarity at certain spots, because the great thing about June this year, especially, is I feel like there's a couple position groups that are really well represented in the official group visitor list. Like I mentioned safety earlier, you already are going to have at least at safety on campus for official visits in June. You're going to have Marquise Gallegos out of California. You're going to have Davis Andrews from Utah come back for a visit. You're going to have Jalen McClain, who is the New Jersey product. And you also are probably going to try to get DeJuan Lane in for an official visit at some point. So there's a lot of clarity that's going to happen at safety in 2024 in June. There's no doubt about it. You're also going to see some clarity at the defensive line. Elijah Rushing is going to be on campus for an official visit. Malachi Williams is going to be on campus. Logan Thomas has already planned a couple trips back to campus. So June, yes, I believe is going to be a month of clarity for the Notre Dame class, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Because I know that Brandon talked about this the other day on the board, Brandon Plesner, but there's also a couple key offensive linemen that are going to be visiting early on in June as well. So there are several positions that I think you're going to get tremendous clarity. And I also would just say, Rob, that a lot of the guys that are on Notre Dame's board that they're pushing hard for are guys that are planning on making a decision by senior year. There aren't a ton of players that are planning to go into the fall as of right now. There just aren't a lot of guys on the board. So I think clarity comes in June, and then you start seeing the dominoes continue to fall as Notre Dame is already at 16 now.
Ryan, this kind of question right here from Kevin, I think fits into with what you were talking about earlier. Kevin says, my big question is, with there being a potential need at tight end, which I don't think there is right now, but potential, sure, possibility of getting 16 linemen, a second back, a possibility of a receiver and cornerback. Can you use 4 spots at linebacker? And that doesn't include O-line. I think this is part of it. The conversation, sure, Kevin, is if Notre Dame's going to go beyond a position, linebacker would not be the position they go beyond.
Yeah.
It'd be a second back, which I think is a need now. It'd be a 4th receiver, a second tight end, because Carter Nelson wants to come. It'd be a 4th offensive lineman. It'd be a 3rd corner, a 4th safety. And I think part of it too, Ryan, is not because of anything other than this is just not a year at linebacker where you're just going to want to go past your numbers because of the current makeup of your team, but also because it's not a great linebacker class. Overall, so I think that factors into it as well. There's there's some years, Ryan, we're like, dude, we got to go beyond because there's just too many good players at this position this year. I mean, we just can't afford to not bring a guy in. There's not a lot of positions like that this year on defensive line, which is even the only reason they're even considering a fourth defensive end is because of that right there, though, right? Because it is a really good edge year.
Yeah.
And so that's one where they're like, man, they're just, we can't say no to Bryce Young. We can't say no to Cole Mullins. We can't say no to Logan Thomas, and we can't say no to Elijah Rushing and Malachi Williams. So we may have to go over our numbers. That's also another reason why you don't do that at a position where it's not a great year. And I think Notre Dame is finally at the point in their roster, Ryan, where there's just nowhere that they need to take numbers to fill a dire need.
Right.
Outside of maybe running back, because we estimate a leave after this season, most likely. At least that's our 100% our opinion. I don't have any intel telling me that. It's just my opinion. But I think the last two classes, for the most part, have helped alleviate a lot of that stuff, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where now you're trying to get impact players and not just numbers, with the exception of running back and safety. Those are the only two. And running back only because of, you're going to lose a couple veterans early, probably.
Well, I think that, Kevin, for this question, I would say that it's very nuanced and it changes quickly, because we're sitting here today talking about numbers that could change very quickly. I mean, you're only a major injury away, a player transferring away, a player you expected to enter the NFL draft next year that decides to come back that wasn't what you forecasted. I think the big thing, though, and the reason that the numbers are kind of what they are right now, is that we do need to remember that there's a difference between our outside perception and what the Notre Dame coaching staff and recruiting staff knows of the roster. Because I look at this tight end group right now at Notre Dame as far as on the roster in 2023, and I'm like, I would seriously consider taking a second tight end in this class. One, because I think Corey Nelson's really good, but also you have some major injury question marks on this roster. Like Eli Raritan, I think, is another injury setback away from hey, man, this is very troubling as far as the long term, right? Is he going to come back? Kevin Bauman's a guy that's been injured. You lost Kane Barang this offseason. There's been a lot of I don't say better word for it. There's been a lot of attrition at the tight end spot as far as injuries are concerned, right? So my perception is I think I would consider a second tight end in the class. But who would know more about those injuries than I would? It's the Notre Dame coaching staff and the strength and conditioning staff. They would know a lot more than I would. So we do need to just cut people slack some time and be like, hey, man, they know their team a little bit better than as far as the in and outs of everyday rehabilitation and how they're really loving being a part of the
It's
roster.
not just that, though, Ryan, either. People have to understand that this offensive staff is different than the one before. They're not going to live in 12 and 13 all game like they have in the past either. This is a staff that wants to be able to go 12, wants to be able to go 13, but also wants to do a bunch of 11. And when you're a team that wants to base yourself out of 11 and actually do that, you don't need 7 tight ends. You don't need 6 tight ends. You need 5 on your roster, and you only need 2 healthy to get through a game. I mean, they went in a bowl game and had 2 healthy tight ends and won the game, and tight end wasn't an issue. Now, you don't want to do that for 13 weeks.
Right.
But they're a long way away from having to do that for 13 weeks. You know what I mean? Especially when you get Cooper Flanagan in. So, but that's why you be open to the idea of a second tight end, but you don't take a guy just to take a guy either. And that's to Ryan's point. That's why, you got to give them a little bit of doubt that they know this roster. And that includes, hey, we got plenty of running backs and receivers that can help us fill that need. Because the thing is, with a second tight end, you don't always have to fill that spot with just a tight end. Kind of well, who's your slot receiver after so-and-so? Well, it's a tight end. It's a running back. It's a combination of the two. It's not always a receiver. Depends on what your strengths are from a personnel standpoint, and that factors into it as well.
Next question from DMND13. Brian Driscoll, from your updated roster the other day, it looks like all 3 returning starting linebackers technically have 2 years of eligibility left. Do you think each will be welcomed back in 2024?
I'd be shocked if all 3 of them came back. I had somebody on the board today that said none of them are coming back. Well, I think that's a reach as well. I could see at least one of them coming back, possibly 2. I don't see all 3. At the very least, you get Jack Kaiser or J.D. Bertrand back in 2024. In my opinion. If I had to bet, I'd probably bet on Jack Kaiser coming back. I could see DJ being ready to go pro after this year. If he has a good year, I could, like 3-year starter. What else does he have to prove? He just risks injury, things like that. Maybe Jack Kaiser comes back to be a full-time inside guy. I'm not sure. But, I mean, I'd be shocked if all three of them came back, Ryan. I'd be more shocked if all three came back than all three leave, to be completely honest with you at this point in time.
Yeah. We're a long way away from that one, obviously, right, Dan? I mean, it's a tough question to answer right now. I mean, because all of them are going to be graduated at that point, right? I mean, if to Brian's point, if JD has another season where he leads Notre Dame in tackles, for instance, and he has some production, I mean, he's not going to get longer by staying another year at Notre Dame. Like, he's not going to grow 2 inches, in his 6th year at Notre Dame or whatever it would be at that point. So we shall see. We shall see. You always need some veteran leadership, but I also think that you need to balance it as far as not blocking guys from playing, right?
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. Or taking snaps away from guys that need those snaps, even if it's not just a starting lineup, but it's also you're taking reps away from guys as well in practice, which is a big part of it.
Next question is from Mike Sullivan. Can a walk-on be offered a scholarship for this year and be returned to walk-on status next year?
Yes. Now, obviously, if part of it depends on the conversation you have with the player. Most walk-ons are granted scholarships. They know it's for a year, and then it gets re-upped every year or not. There's usually an understanding of it's for this year. So as long as you're honest with a kid, hey, listen, we're going to put you on scholarship this year. We have the need, but it's not guaranteed for you the next year. As long as you're honest with kids, there's nothing wrong with that. Because for most kids, like, you come to Notre Dame knowing you're going to be paying your own way for 4 years. And if you get a year reprieve, that's like a $70,000 year reprieve. That's a pretty big year reprieve.
Your parents are pretty happy on that one.
Absolutely. So it just depends on what the conversation is, but there's nothing locking a kid into a multi-year scholarship as a walk-on unless you give him your word you're going to do that. And even then, you don't have to honor that. You're a piece of crap if you don't, but, you don't have to. There's nothing legally binding unless you sign a legal contract, which there's no way a school's going to do that, in my opinion. There's no way they're going to do that.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to some more here, Mr. Roberts.
Next question is from Call Me Ty. Said, I'm okay with the Bodie Kahoun commitments. All I wanted from Notre Dame linebacker recruiting was more tall, long guys that want to hit, bigger versions of Drew White and JD Bertrand. Do you think we are getting that this year? I think Call Me Ty, like, the one thing that you can't question about the linebacker recruiting in 2024, and again, there are questions that you can arise, but the one question that you can't is that Notre Dame's targeting a lot of length and athleticism at linebacker in 2024. I mean, everybody on the board, you're like, that guy is tall, long, and can run a little bit. Like, every single one. I mean, so yeah. I mean, yes, Notre Dame is definitely upgrading the length and the athleticism components of playing on the second level. There's no doubt. Will they all develop and hit their ceilings? That's the major question mark, right? But that's why I fought back against the Bodie Kahoun, Drew White, and JD Bertrand comparisons in general. He is 2 to 3 inches taller than both those guys. He is probably 2 to 3 inches longer than both those guys, if not more. And he runs probably 1/10 of a second faster in the 40 than both of those kids.
And he's nowhere close to where they were in development as a football player. Look, I don't know how Drew White turned into some like borderline walk-on at Notre Dame, but that guy had offers from a ton of SEC schools and was a starting middle linebacker at St. Thomas Aquinas. So, I mean, he wasn't some bum that was lucky to be on scholarship at Notre Dame. And so, they were him and JD Bertrand also. JD Bertrand was committed to Georgia at one point in time. Now they backed off that offer, but at one point in time they thought enough of him to offer him a scholarship. And it wasn't that he wasn't good or got worse. It's just that they started to get to that point where they were just really starting to load up on some big time guys. But let me read to you Drew White's offer list: Arkansas, Illinois, Iowa State, LSU, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio State, Syracuse, Wisconsin, West Virginia, and Florida are among the schools that offer Drew White a scholarship coming out of high school. So to some people who say offer lists are all that matters, well, it's a pretty good offer list. Or were
really
they committed or not? Well, they thought enough of him to offer him a scholarship at some point in time. So he's not some bum. He wasn't like just a slightly better version of Joe Schmidt. And to me, there's nothing about Bodie Kahoun that reminds me of either one of those two guys, even a longer version of them, because he's a raw kid that's tall, long, and can run. They were shorter, stockier, excellent high school football players. Bodie is more of an excellent prospect that's still learning the position. They were really, really good high school football players that just lacked some of the measurables to translate that to the next level. But Drew White was a 3-year starter at Notre Dame on teams that went, 11-2, 10-2 and made the playoff, and 11-2. That's what Drew White started on in his career.
And J.D. Bertrand's going to be a 3-year starter at Notre Dame as well. So,
yeah. So, man, that's interesting. All right, let's get to some more questions here.
Maurice Grant said, "I'm confused how this isn't settling. There are many other backers the staff would take no matter how you slice it. They are taking a kid they like for sure, but also they feel they can get."
I don't think that look, Maurice, I don't know if you and I would necessarily disagree a ton on evaluation of Bodie Kahoun in certain areas. My whole thing is, I just think that a lot of us are projecting our opinion of Bodie onto the Notre Dame coaching staff and assuming that because we feel a certain way about Bodie, and I'm speaking for everybody that kind of is holding this view just for argument's sake, that must mean the staff feels that way, but they're going to take him anyway because of whatever. What I'm telling you is you can disagree with their evaluation of Bodie Kahoun. I'm simply telling you that this is not how they view him. They don't view him as a guy that they're just taking because they can get. They had to out-recruit Tennessee, some other programs for him. Miami just recently offered him, trying to get into the mix. And so my point is simply, we can have a conversation about Bodie Kahoun, should he be in a guy you take this early, things like that. But they're not settling, and they don't have a whole lot of backers on the board ranked higher than him. I mean, yeah, if they thought they had a shot at Sammy Brown, they might have waited a little bit for him or Teddy Rizek, maybe. But you're not in that game. And so you have to be realistic about who you're going to get. But there's also the era of, well, I'm getting this kid because we know we can get him, even though he's not a Notre Dame guy. And honestly, we've seen Notre Dame do that before, including this staff, to be honest with you. They're not perfect or infallible. Yeah. I'm simply saying that this is not the motivation behind that commitment. They genuinely think very highly of Bodie Kahoun. And we can have that conversation. They should, but they definitely think very highly of him. There's no doubt about it.
Yep. They were always pushing for Bodie. It's just kind of the end-all, be-all. So it's not settling if you just are kind of out of options. Right. You're like, I got to do this now.
Doesn't mean we're saying they're right or that you can't question it. Not saying that at all. I'm just saying at least we should understand what the motivations were for it.
Yeah. From Irish Gordianot says, was Bodie Kahoun Al Golden's guy, or is he a guy the staff is all behind? How involved was Max Bulla in recruiting Bodie Kahoun?
I would encourage you, Irish Gordianot, to read Ryan's article on the front page. Actually, matter of fact, I'm going to put it into the chat now, Ryan. I'm going to put the whole package article that you wrote today with Bodie into the chat there so you guys can see it. But the thing that Ryan was saying earlier, and the reason I encourage you to read this is because every time he talked about the staff, he talked about everybody that could potentially be involved. The head coach, the D coordinator, the linebackers coach, which is Max Bulla, and the director of recruiting, Chad Bowden. They were all involved in this. And I will say this again, we can question the evaluation if you want. Totally fair, totally fine. But there was nobody on the staff that had any question at all about, is Bodie Kahoun a guy we want or not? None. Now, we'll find out if the entire staff was right or wrong about it, but this was not like, and again, I'll tell you, that's not true of other players on the board at linebacker and at other positions where it's not everybody's on board with taking that guy. Yeah. This guy, however, is one that everybody's on board with. And there's some kids that you'll take, and this is true of football, and you want this, Ryan, happens in the NFL draft too. Not everybody was sold on that kid, but that one scout or that one coach that we love and respect was willing to put his reputation on line for that guy.
Yeah.
There's kids in this class that there are coaches on the staff that did that for.
Pounding the table, guys.
That's right.
Yeah.
I believe, and that's what happened to Anthony Knapp and Joe Rudolph. Now we're going to find out if Joe Rudolph was right or wrong about that, but he had an ultimate belief that Anthony Knapp is a Notre Dame caliber player. And we'll find out if he's right or wrong, but that was not a reach from the standpoint of, in his mind, is he reaching? It may end up being a reach in practicality. But Bodie Kahoun is one of those guys that was a no-brainer for this staff once they got involved with him. He's a 4.0 plus student. The athleticism checked out once they got a chance to size him up in person and saw he's 6'3", long. It was a no-brainer for them. Obviously not for everybody in the chat today, but for them, it was a no-brainer. So it's a little bit of a different deal. Here's a question too, Ryan, that Five Burkhart boy says, isn't Bodie more like Zinter? I would argue he's more like Drake Bowen. If you're going to compare him to one of the linebackers from last year, Drake Bowen's the comparison. Raw, two-sport guy, pretty athletic, but not a natural football player. I think Drake Bowen, now he's not as good as Drake, in my opinion, but as far as style, background, things like that, he's more similar to Drake than he is Preston Zinter.
Explosive downhill type of kid. Yeah, I could get there. I get there because Drake also had experience playing in space a little bit more early on in his Andrean career, which is slight parallel to obviously Bodie playing safety when he was a sophomore in high school. So I think there are some qualities there. And then also you saw Bodie on the line of scrimmage a little bit as well. You would see Drake Bowen on the line of scrimmage rushing the passer a lot too. You would see that with Preston Zinter as well, but I just think Preston's a little bit of a different athlete too.
Right. I agree, Ryan. Agree with you completely. Got a super chat from Nathan Milton. I'll go ahead and ask this one for you, Ryan, so you can answer it. Is there any chance Notre Dame takes 2 tight ends in this class?
As of right now, Nathan, I don't think so, but I think it can change. Like, I do think it can change.
Do you think that's because they don't get Carter Nelson? Is that your thought on that, Ryan? Because
no, I just think that they're a little. I mean, I think that they would have a good chance with Carter Nelson. I just don't know if they find it a necessity to get to 2 tight ends in the class. It's more about if the stars aligned, if that makes sense.
I would not be shocked if they decided to take a second tight end over a 4th receiver if it's Carter Nelson.
I mean, I'd be completely open with that. Everybody knows I would.
I think that they would only take a second tight end if it's Carter Nelson. That's what I think.
And I think that they would be very smart for that fact.
Yeah,
so.
Agree. I don't think the staff viewed Jaden Riddell the way that fans do. I don't think the staff viewed Jaden Riddell as a no-brainer, difference maker, top 50 recruit like some fans do, which is why they weren't willing to take him as a second tight end. And there are some other reasons why they backed off of him as well, but they would only take a second tight end if one kid wants to commit, and that's Carter Nelson. That's it. So to Ryan's point, like, we'll see how that plays out and what the chances are for that, but they're not necessarily, it's one of those things where we don't need a second tight end, but that kid might be too good to pass up. Plus,
for it.
He brings some pass catching uniqueness because he is fast and you can line him up out wide. He's more Tyler Eifert than he is Michael Mayer.
Yes.
As how you would use him at the next level, right? Not body type wise, because Tyler was massive, and I don't see Carter Nelson getting to be 6'6", 260 like Tyler Eifert was when it was all said and done. But how you use him in the offense would be very similar. Scott Gibbs of the Super Chat said, love the show. Scott, thank you very, very much, my friend. Thank you very, very much.
Next question is from David Lowe. Said, when recruiting, why not shoot for the stars on the top guys? And if you don't land them, then go for kids like this.
Again, you're working with the wrong assumption that you are the arbiter of what is a top guy or not, or that Rivals or 247 are the arbiters of what is a top guy or not. Okay. What I'm telling you is this, David, we don't know if Notre Dame is right or wrong on this. I'm not arguing that they're right or wrong on this. What I'm telling you is stop asking questions like this, because I'm telling you that they view him as a top guy. They view him as a top guy. I don't know if they're going to be right about that, Ryan. Neither one of us do. You like him more than I do. We both view him as a few 4-star better, but neither of us are sitting at our pound table saying, you guys are going to look so stupid in 3 years for questioning Bodie Kahoun. We are not saying that at all. At all. But what I am saying is, if you ask me why not shoot for the stars on the top guys, and I'm going to tell you they are in their opinion. They view Bodie Kahoun as exactly what you're saying they should recruit. What you're upset about is that they're not going off of what Rivals and 247 say. That's literally your beef, David. You think Notre Dame should evaluate and recruit based off what Rivals and 247 and On3 think about recruits. That's the reality, because your mood and your reaction to every single kid they're after is based on what a star ranking is. Yours in particular. And I'm okay with you feeling that way about rankings. That's fine. But I think the error, however, David, is sometimes the Notre Dame coaching staff won't view it the same way that 247 or Rivals and On3 do. They do view Justin Scott the same way that those site outlets do, right? They do. They view some guys better. Some guys they don't view as high as the services do. I'm simply telling you, if I were to sit here and say Teddy Rizak, they viewed as a star, they view him as, I'd be lying to you. Because if they thought that, they wouldn't have waited till May to offer him, right? They knew about him. For Ryan, you did the interview with this coach. It was a great interview, by the way, Ryan. Very well done if you haven't read that yet. But it's very clear they've known about Teddy for a long time.
Yeah.
They wanted to continue to evaluate and then decided this is a guy that we want. I'd be lying to you if I said, no, they viewed him as a top player. Always. I'd be lying to you. But I'm not lying to you when I say that's how they feel about Bodie Kahoun. If Bodie Kahoun would have wanted to commit to Notre Dame the day after they offered him, they'd have taken his commitment with everybody else on the board. They view him as a top guy. You may not. That's fair. I'm not telling you have to. I'm not telling you need to agree with them. 247 doesn't. On3 doesn't. And Rivals doesn't, because Rivals has him as a 4-star, Ryan, but not in their top 250.
Right.
I'm just telling you Notre Dame views him as this type of player. We'll find out if they're right or wrong. But I think too many of you are allowing recruiting rankings to determine not ever, like, I don't think Brandon Plesner gives a rip about recruiting rankings. He's trusting his own evaluation. Now, He and I disagree on a lot of guys in this class. Totally fair. But I know that Brandon's breaking down the film. I do know that.
He was
There's no question.
He was high on Darian Mayo early when he was still a 3-star guy. So yeah, Brandon definitely watches.
With Brandon not liking this, because I at least know that's his honest opinion.
Yeah.
But when you're making your evaluation simply based off of recruiting rankings and offer lists, and I say, okay, that's fine. I'm okay with you evaluating that. I'm just, don't project that onto the thinking the Notre Dame coaching staff agrees with you. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. And in this instance, they definitely do not. This is definitely a guy, Ryan, that they view as a top player.
Yeah.
We'll find out soon if they're right or wrong.
From day one, they felt that. So,
that's right.
Yeah, it's been consistent.
All right, here we go. Here's one, Ryan. I'm going to ask this for you. It says, Mark Brown asks, where do you see Kahoun's growth? His frame looks like he could hit 240 or more to me. Hard to know if he keeps his athleticism at that weight, though.
Well, I think it's a great sign, Mark, that he has maintained and even improved the speed, in his opinion, this offseason, despite gaining a decent amount of weight. He's up to about, I think 219 was what he was at one of his visits to Notre Dame this offseason. So he's right around 220. I agree with you. I think that he's going to be 235 plus probably a couple years into his career. I think that he can carry that weight pretty easily. The biggest growth I think that you're going to see from him is, I think that the biggest part of his game that I think needs to improve outside of just playing with a little bit better base and bends is that I think that he just needs to improve his power profile, man. I think he needs to get a little stronger. Upper body needs to add a little bit of strength. So I think it's just the filling out of the body, man. Like, that's the biggest thing from a physical perspective. That's the biggest growth for me, is that he comes to balance as a tackler, but he just doesn't have a lot of pop behind his pads right now, just because I think he lacks a little bit of lower body and upper body strength. And then the ability to play through contact, obviously, stack and shed at the point of attack, get off of blocks. I just think that really it's his ability to add good weights, not just add weights, add power to his frame.
Because if his frame allows him to get to 240, then he'll have no problem keeping the athleticism. I want to stress something else too. Part of the power profile comes from the other sport he plays. Because lacrosse is a sport where you need strong upper body, but it's an endurance sport. It's more basketball than it is baseball and football from a conditioning standpoint, because you're always moving. Yeah. There's no stopping in between each play. Football is 3 to 5 seconds of hard play, and then you chill for 30 seconds. Then you do it again, and then you take a time. Lacrosse is literally nonstop. It's like soccer, I guess, is probably a better way to put it. It's more soccer from a conditioning standpoint than it is football. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Because it's again, you have however long a quarter is or whatever it is, but it's just nonstop. There's no timeouts there like you have in football and baseball and even to a degree basketball with like foul shooting and stuff like that. It is just nonstop running. And so it requires a different type of conditioning, strength conditioning for that sport than it does for football. So once he starts focusing on football and the strength conditioning that goes along with football, I think you're going to see that power profile check out because I think he's got a pretty good lower half. And I think it's also going to be impacted by his technique. For example, if I was to walk up to you and have your base like this and just be standing there on all fours, just, balanced, and I pushed you, you'd fall back.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
But if I walked up to you and you had a nice base, you were on the balls of your feet and you were ready, and then I pushed you, I'd meet a lot more resistance and I wouldn't be able to push you back as easily with the same amount of force. Right. So your base, your technique, the leverage in which you attack a ball player is going to impact the power in which that you arrive at the football, even though you may have the natural power to be more effective in that situation. So that's why we emphasize things like technique and playing lower and stuff like that, because you'll see an offensive lineman that one snap comes off and drills a guy, and then the next snap gets put on skates. Well, did the other guy get stronger than him on that play? No, he lost the technique battle. He lost the leverage battle. And I think that more than anything is why we don't see as much power from Bodie, but then you add in the lacrosse aspect to it. And that is something that if he is going to play both sports at the next level is a little bit concerning for me, to be completely honest with you, is will he be able to develop the lower body power and explosiveness needed if he's also playing lacrosse in the offseason? That's a little bit of a question for me. And I think that's why we've seen Nolan Ziegler blow up so much since he got to college. Stop playing lacrosse. And so now it's all about power, all about explosiveness. And you're seeing that kid fill out like that. I mean, he went from 205 to 230 in one offseason and filled out, and he's powerful. And he's even more explosive now than he was before. And I think that's a similar situation to Bodie. But if Bodie's going to get to 240 as well, I think it's going to take time. I think it'll take a couple years probably for him to get to that point in time if he's going to get there.
Agree. Next question is from Brandon Plesner. Says, who is the next Rover in line behind Kaiser? I feel that Rover was arguably the most important linebacker spot in the 2024 class, and they landed a kid that's going to need time. Who can be the next guy there?
Well, right now it's Jalen Sneed. It's part of that. And Jaden Osbury played Rover this spring. Yeah. The other thing too, Ryan, is it's a lot like what I was saying earlier about like the slot and 11 and stuff like that. Sometimes it's no linebacker. It's Thomas Harper.
Yeah,
it's Ryan Barnes. It's Clarence Lewis. It's maybe Antonio Carter. It's a DB. That's the next guy there. So you don't need the same, like, and the point is when you're evaluating your roster, I don't need the same depth at Rover from a body standpoint that I need at Mike or Will, because I can go an entire game and never use my Rover ever. And like if Notre Dame didn't play their Rover for a single snap against Ohio State, I wouldn't be like, well, what are you guys doing? Right. And USC might even be a better example for that. NC State's probably going to be a good example for that this year if Robert and I does there what he's done everywhere else, right? Would you say that's fair, Ryan?
Yeah.
But then there's going to be other games where you need it. So that's a factor too. So if that's true, I don't need 4 Rovers. But right now, the 3 guys that I think would play Rover if the need was there is Jack Kaiser, Jalen Sneed, who is a Rover and a Will, and Jaden Osbury, who right now is more of a Rover. That's where I'm at with those guys.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, again, Brandon, I think that is going to, because to your point, I mean, Teddy Rizak's not ready to play in 2024, right? But you have Jaden Osbury, you have Jalen Sneed, the guys that can buy that development a little bit of time over the next couple of years, which I think could be big time, obviously, for Rizak's development. So let's hope that they're able to pan out, because I do think that there is, I mean, Brandon, it's certainly questionable, right, as far as like the future of the Rover position, because, does Jalen Sneed or Jaden Osbury, do they grow out of the Rover position at some point too? I mean, there's always questions there. So it's reasonable.
Yep. And as you mentioned, obviously, they landed a Rover in this class. He may need time, but he's going to have time.
Yes.
Because the 2 guys we mentioned behind Jack Kaiser are guys with 4 years of eligibility remaining. I don't expect Jalen Sneed to be a 5-year player, but he's could potentially certainly be a 2 or 3 years more. Yep. And Jaden Osbury is probably a 4-year guy as well, in my view.
Next question is from Irishman7114. do you think Rizak or
Kahoun.
Kahoun can play at another position? I like Kahoun, but I'd rather have my mind is Kingston, Viamoasa, and Chris Cole. If we're only taking 3, I don't want to push out KVA or Cole.
Well, first of all, they're never going to push out Kingston. I mean, he's the top guy on their board, but I understand where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, you have to embrace the fact that the Notre Dame coaching staff doesn't see it your way. They know about both of those kids. They chose Bodie Kahoun as a guy that they liked more, and they're willing to say no to those kids to take him. So say what you want. I mean, we can debate if they should have done that, but they view it that way. So can they play another position? Maybe. Anytime you have a 6'3", 220-pound linebacker that can run, there's a chance he could end up being a Viper.
Sure.
Right? I mean, Preston Zinner, Josh Burnham, all those guys can potentially be that. I don't think they're recruiting him to potentially do that. Where that was always something that was a chance with Josh Burnham. It was always a chance. And then, of course, he gets to senior year, he gets a lot bigger, and it's a good chance it's going to come at some point in time. Or could come. I don't think that's how they're recruiting these guys. Rizak his other positions are at linebacker. Rover will potentially, but he's not a guy.
He's not going to get big enough to play Viper.
No way. The only way he'd be a Viper, Ryan, is if like in a nickel package is just like, he's a 225-pound edge rusher.
NASCAR, baby.
You're just going to blitz him, right? You're going try a dime nickel. You're just going to blitz him off the edge. But that's more of a linebacker type of thing than anything else. That's how that goes. All right, let's get to another one.
John Climax said, in a year where there isn't high-level depth, how do you recruit? Project players with high ceilings or high floors? John, I think that this is a situation where I have to be real with myself about the development of my coaching staff, right? Do I have confidence in development? If I do, and most coaches should, I think that you lean towards high floors, but I do think that there is not a one-size-fits-all and absolute here. You have to have a balance of trying to find those ceilings and those floors, but in a situation where there might be a scarcity of depth of impact talent, I do think that leaning towards the upside is a pretty wise decision at times, as long as you are confident that your team can develop. And if they can, then I think that you are going to hit more often than you miss. But I just think that there's a competitive balance between the floor and the ceiling. But I always tend to go to the ceiling, personally. Just me, though.
And there are certain positions, Ryan, where I'm okay with you always going with the ceiling.
Yep.
And there are usually positions where athleticism is more important and where technique is easier to coach, right? And it's skill positions, corner, receiver, running back. When it comes to putting lines, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Ryan. When it comes to putting lines together, I think you even more so need to make sure that you're getting a good amount of floor focus as well. Like if you give me 3 raw receivers that are really tall, long, fast, and at least they know how to catch, I'm excited as a receivers coach, as a corners coach. You give me a bunch of guys like that at D line, and I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about this because there's just so much more than just being athletic involved to it. Same with offensive tackle. Like, you gave me this really athletic kid. He has no clue how to get into a stance. You know how much work I have to do on this? You know what I mean? So offensive line, it requires a lot more than that. So it also depends on the position. Yeah, to me too. And where some position strength is more important. Sometimes that's where a floor comes from. And that's kind of where I'm coming from on that one, Ryan. Ryan, we got a couple more Notre Dame recruiting questions, and then I know you got to run. Then I got 3 more sort of non-recruiting questions that we'll get to. So we'll go there. Ray Holcraft says, on the offensive side of the ball, outside of OT Gary Lambert, who is an absolute must get? For me, there's only one other must get for me outside of Gary Lambert, but I want to hear your thoughts first, Ryan.
I wouldn't say there's a must get outside of it, Ray. I know who Brian's going to say, and I completely understand why he's going there. I just think that you need a quality running back to go along with Aeneas Williams. I'm not necessarily on the boat that you need a 100% of a difference maker. I would be good with a couple of the guys that are on the board at running back, honestly.
But that's what I'm talking about, Ryan. That's what I would say. A second back was going to be my must get. It wasn't necessarily going to be Keydron Young. You give me Anthony Carey or Xavier Robinson, I'm good. Yeah. So I get you were thinking I was going to go Keydron Young.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
He's my top running back. There's no question. He's my top running back. But if Notre Dame gets Anthony Carey to go with Aeneas Williams, call me excited. I mean, I'm right. And that's what I like. I have my guys I like, but it's about adding quality talent to your roster. And Anthony Carey is a really good football player. Xavier Robinson would probably be a little bit more of a we'll see kind of guy for me, just compared to those other two. But I'm in the thing of Kedron's my top guy, but it's like picking between Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. Those are two really good football players.
Yeah.
Give me one of those and I'm good to go. My thing, Ryan, was going to be, I think they need a second back. A good starting caliber second back is a must in this class.
That's fair.
I just don't think it has, like, to me, the gap between Anthony Carey and Kedron Young is not as wide as Gilby Lambert and whoever the next offensive tackle is.
Gurby Lambert's a must. I mean, Ray, in this class, like you have to land Gurby Lambert, or else the offensive line group gets a little it's a little shaky, man. It's a little hairy. So,
but would you agree though that a good second back is a must though, Ryan?
Yeah,
based on numbers, especially if we're assuming if Audric doesn't leave, then they're good.
Yes.
If Audric comes back for senior year, then they're good. This is also partly me projecting that I just think he's going to go pro because I think he's going to have a really big year.
It's fair.
So let me ask this one, Ryan, since while you're still with us, I think this is an interesting question here. Eric Santini says, my thoughts on Jaden Davis not getting an Elite 11 finals invite, and how Michigan writers said they would still take JD over Carr. First of all, of course, Michigan writers are going to say that. What are they going to say? Like, there's no way they're not going to say that. But that's one of the biggest homer groups of reporters out there. But I'm not surprised, Ryan, he didn't get an Elite 11 invite. What are your thoughts? Because Aaron Nolan got it. I'm not shocked at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought he would personally. I thought he would. I don't know. Like he's got the notoriety to him. He's committed to the University of Michigan. Like I thought that he would personally, but I mean, I'm not like heartbroken over it. I think he's a little bit overrated, but
I think he's a lot overrated. I don't think he's a top 100 player. I also, in fairness, don't think this is the kind of setting where you're going to get the best of Jaden Davis.
That's fair.
Part of what makes Jaden Davis a good football player is the fact that he's a pretty good athlete, he can run around. Aaron Nolan is a drop back quarterback. That's all he does, right? He means a decent athlete, but Aaron Nolan is a passing quarterback. Yeah. Jaden Davis is more of a dual threat guy, and those dual threat guys don't always look great in these type of settings.
Sure.
Right? And so that's another reason I'm not surprised he didn't get it. I get where you're coming from with the ranking standpoint, but I don't think he's that good. I don't think he's a top 100 player, and I don't think this is the ideal setting for him to show out. Now, you go in an 11-11 game, then Jaden Davis is going to look better than he is in a routes on air, pinpoint precision passing type of situation. He's not going to look as good. And then the last question for you, Ryan, before you get out of here, Tommy Guns, he said, so Brian, which recruits would you put your mortgage on the line for, currently uncommitted only? So I'm going to ask you, Ryan, to answer that question first. The comment I made was, I'm not putting my mortgage on the line to say that they're going to get, I think at the time, who did I say?
Davis Andrews.
I think Davis Andrews, right? Is there anybody right now that if you had to put your mortgage on the line, you had to, you can't say, no, I'm not betting my mortgage on anything, which in real life, I would never bet my mortgage on anything. But in this situation, who are the guys right now that you say, if I had to put my mortgage on the line, that guy's going to end up in this Notre Dame class?
I mean, if Notre Dame goes to 4 wide receivers, I would put my mortgage on Jason Robinson Jr. being in the class if they push for him, like 100%. I think that he would want to be in the class if they do go to 4 wide receivers. So that would be one. I actually feel pretty confident about Gurby Lambert all of a sudden, just because he's the only official visit that he set up so far is to Notre Dame. So obviously there was some clear interest there. So I would say Gurby Lambert's one that I'm pretty confident in. I think Jason Robinson is one that I would be extremely confident in if you guarantee me that they would go to 4 wide receivers. Otherwise, I'm not
none of the
confident
safeties,
in
right?
What's that?
I mean, do you disagree with me or agree with me? Because you would know better than me because you talked to the kid. But do you disagree with my take on Davis Andrews, or are you a little bit more confident?
I think they're the clear leader, but I'm not ready to bet a mortgage on it. Like I think they're the clear leader, though. I do, but yeah, I wouldn't bet mortgage on it because it's a pretty big thing. It's a pretty big thing.
Yeah, I'd say Gearby, I don't have a problem with. I'm good with you on that one.
Yeah,
that's really the only one right now that I'm like, yeah, they're definitely going to get that. Logan Thomas, that's another one. I'd be willing to put my mortgage on the line that they're going to get. Logan Thomas. That'd be one. One. All right, Ryan, I know you got to run, so I'm going to finish these out because there's some interesting ones here. Archer452 says the Florida State AD came out publicly criticizing the ACC's media deal, talking about $30 million gap year and lamenting that UCF has a better deal in the Big 12. Is this the first move in FSU realigning? Well, look, the reality is FSU just can't choose to realign. They have to find a legal way to get out of that contract. What's going to be very interesting with this whole thing is twofold. Number one is you're already seeing other schools align with them. Clemson said certain things. Miami said certain things. You're going to get some of the Carolinas. I know somebody in the chat sent me a text about, I think it's like Carolina, UNC, Virginia Tech, Miami, NC State, Florida State, and I think somebody else are already kind of meeting with lawyers trying to get out of it. At the end of the day, the reality is they have to find a way to get out of it. And I don't know how they're going to get out of that deal. I mean, just because the deal's not as good for you now as it was, that I don't know if that's a legal basis to get out of that deal. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if they can do that. The other thing that I'm very curious about is if the ACC really wants to fight this, I'm very curious if they're going to start because you got to be careful. I personally believe that there are some ESPN people, whether directly or indirectly, that are trying to get the ACC to break up. If you look at Disney as a company, they're struggling. They're losing billions of dollars. ESPN has been hemorrhaging money for years, and they keep committing these big contracts to these deals. I think they're in a situation where they don't want to have to pay the ACC as a 14-team network the money they're paying the ACC. What I think ESPN wants to be able to do is break up the ACC and then take like 4 to 6 of those teams and then absorb them in the SEC, and then they just keep paying the SEC. That's going to save them money at the end of the day, and I think that's ultimately what they want to do. So if the ACC really wants to fight this and they start to sue these schools, there's going to come a discovery period. And I'm very curious what some of these phone records show and these meetings and different things show when it comes to who's been involved in trying to get these ACC teams out of their contract. And so, because who can give you some loopholes? It's the people on the other side of that contract that also want to be out. It's not just the ACC, some of the ACC teams that want to be out of that contract. It's ESPN, I think, wants out of that contract as well. Now, the question would be, can they mandate it? Is there interest in renegotiating? So that would be something that I'd find interesting is if ESPN did want to just keep the entire ACC, they could always renegotiate the contract instead of risking losing certain teams. But it doesn't bother ESPN because if those teams leave the ACC, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the SEC. Well, ESPN already has the SEC. They just would have to pay less teams. So I think this could get really ugly. If the ACC wants to fight, it could get really ugly. So I'm fascinated by the whole thing, and I'm very curious to see how some of these state schools that are in the same state, because Miami's a private school, but how do these schools in the Carolina school system, how do they handle? Are they all on board? It's going to get very interesting, but I think it could get really ugly if the ACC wants to fight this. It could get really interesting and potentially really ugly. But I think there's certainly an attempt. I don't think that Florida State necessarily wants out of the ACC just because the ACC schools want to get out of that really bad TV deal. And it's only a bad deal now because of the crazy money being thrown at these other schools. I just don't think that's sustainable. And that's why I think ESPN wants to get out of some of these other deals, is because they know they can't afford to pay all these conferences what they used to pay them. And it's going to get really interesting. Then here's another question from Domer Guy 88. I want to get down to this as we get close to wrapping this up. Domer Guy 88 says, is the admin still not accepting undergrad transfers? There has never been a time when the administration was unwilling to accept undergrad transfers. Notre Dame has had undergrad transfers. Alohi Gilman was an undergrad transfer, for example. He transferred from Navy. The issue is some of the players and some of the students who in the women's basketball team, I believe, has landed a couple non-graduate transfers. I believe most of them have been graduates, but I believe they've gotten a couple that were not graduates. And Notre Dame has gotten a couple guys. Brandon Joseph was not a graduate of Northwestern, for example. But looking at it, it's harder for them to get undergrad transfers, Domer Guy, because the different schools, when I mean schools, I mean, the business school, the law school, the different schools, they kind of set their own syllabus, their own standards for what they're going to teach and what they're going to accept. And the way that it is at a lot of the schools is the kid wants to transfer in, they'll look at his transcript, and unless the syllabus is almost identical to the Notre Dame syllabus, they just don't accept the class as towards the major. All the classes will be accepted, but most of them get turned to electives. That's my understanding. And so most of them don't get accepted as major. So then what happens is okay, you can come, but it's going to take you 3 more years to graduate, even though you've been in college for 3 years already, because most of your stuff doesn't count towards your major. Well, they're not going to do that with athletes because the odds of athletes staying that long are slim. And they're not going to do that with most students either, unless the student has expressed desire to say, hey, I don't care if it's going to take me that long. I want to do that. And so that's what makes it harder for football players and for athletes to do that. And so undergrads has never been an issue. They'll take undergrads. It's just a lot harder to get an undergrad. And now I am under the impression that Notre Dame is trying to change this. It's not something where the admissions department can change it. They can't change it. The president can't change it. The AD can't change it. It requires a lot of work. And my understanding is that there are some on campus that are willing to work with them. Just how far that's going to go, we'll find out. But I do think that we'll see Notre Dame be a little bit of a bigger player for undergrad transfers in future portal classes. It's never going to be the primary objective of the staff to get undergrads, but they'll be more open to those guys in the future from what I understand. We'll see if that plays out that way. But that's kind of where we're at. All right, so that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Good questions, a lot of good discussion. Lot that's just not, but we'll get to some of that stuff here as we get down the road. But anyway, we're going to be back tomorrow. So tomorrow we are going to talk the transfer class tomorrow. That's going to be our topic of conversation tomorrow. Obviously, you got Antonio Carter. We'll dive a little bit more into that. We're going to talk about how this transfer class is going to impact Notre Dame. What does this transfer class say about Notre Dame and its willingness to embrace the portal a little bit more or not? We'll talk about just sort of how they impact other positions. There's going to be a lot of stuff tomorrow. So we're going to have a lot of transfer talk tomorrow and just kind of share some of our things of what we think Notre Dame needs to be able and willing to do. How should they embrace the portal? Are they doing it the right way? Should they do it differently? All that kind of stuff we'll talk about tomorrow. So you definitely don't want to miss that. And of course, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you've not done so already, and you're listening via podcast platform, please do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review. Also, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Folks, it's $4.99 a month and $49.99 for a year. There's tons of film breakdowns we're going to start doing. I've already done 3 of them on Sam Hartman. We got more coming down the pike. We're going to start doing our film rooms a little differently. We got Intel, always got Intel on there. Great conversation on the board. You're definitely going to want to be a part of our message board. If you haven't signed up for it, do so. Plus, it's a great way for you to support us. People say, well, I can't keep giving super chats. You only got to do $4.99 once a month to help us out, or a $49.99 for once a year to help us out. So some of y'all give $49.99s in a super chat. That's great. We appreciate that. We love that. But you can also do that once and sign up for an annual membership at Irish Breakdown. At boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you want to support us beyond that, and we have the ability to do that, you can also join one of our booster clubs. We have the Shamrock, the blue, and the gold. The first two, the Shamrock, and they're different levels of support. The first two, the blue and the Shamrock. If you sign up for one of those, you'll also get a free IB Club mug. Free of charge. It'll come from us. I pay the shipping, I pay the handling, I pay for all of it. It's just a thank you for your support of Irish Breakdown. If you join the Gold Club, which is the highest tier, if you join the Gold Booster Club, then you also get the mug, plus you get a free IB Club t-shirt. There are 5 different color options. It's up to you, whatever size that you want. We can get that to you as well. And it's just a big thank you from us to you for your support of Irish Breakdown. So you can do that as well. And you can find that all at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you again very soon, folks. Thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.